It was supposed to be a silent night at O'Hare International Airport, but silence is a luxury when 8 of the nation's most elite police dogs decide to rebel at the exact same second. They did not attack a terrorist. They did not sniff out a bomb. They did not chase a fleeing fugitive. Instead, they surrounded a 6-year-old girl holding a ragged doll. And when the police raised their weapons, the dogs did not back down. They turned their teeth toward their own handlers. Why would 8 loyal beasts risk death to protect a child none of them had ever met? The answer buried inside a winter coat would bring the entire airport to its knees. The blizzard outside Terminal 3 was a white wall of fury battering the glass with a violence that made the steel beams groan. It was Christmas Eve in Chicago, and O'Hare was not just an airport, it was a containment zone for 50,000 stranded souls. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, wet wool, and rising desperation. Every flight was delayed. Every temper was frayed. The noise was a deafening ocean of crying babies, angry phone calls, and the relentless drone of the public address system announcing yet another cancellation. Officer Jack Sterling moved through the sea of bodies with the practiced indifference of a man who had spent 20 years wearing a badge. At his side walked Titan, a 90-pound German shepherd with a coat like burnished copper and eyes that usually missed nothing. Usually. Tonight, Titan was moving slower than normal. His back left leg had a microscopic hitch in its rhythm, a stiffness that only Jack could see. This was the end of the line. The paperwork was already sitting on the sergeant's desk. Tomorrow morning, Titan would officially be retired. A couch dog, a porch guardian, no more bomb sweeps, no more takedowns on the tarmac. Jack reached down and rested his hand on Titan's head, feeling the familiar heat of the animal. "Just a few more hours, buddy," Jack whispered. "We finish this shift. We go home and we open that steak I bought you." Titan looked up. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't pant. He stopped dead in the center of the concourse. The flow of passengers parted around them like water around a stone. Jack felt a sudden tension shoot up the leash, a vibration that went straight from the dog's collar to his own heart. "What is it?" Jack asked, his voice dropping to a serious register. He scanned the crowd. A nervous traveler, an unattended bag, a concealed weapon. Jack looked for the threat, but there was nothing. Just the endless misery of the holiday rush. Then Titan did something he had never done in 9 years of service. He threw his head back and let out a sound that froze the blood of everyone within 100 yards. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was a howl. A long, mournful primal scream that cut through the noise of the terminal like a razor blade through silk. It was the sound of a wolf calling to its pack across a frozen tundra, not a police dog in a heated building. Before Jack could yank the leash, the response came. From the far end of Concourse B, a Belgian Malinois named Brutus, assigned to narcotics, snapped his heavy leather lead like it was sewing thread. His handler shouted, but Brutus was already a black blur sprinting across the polished terrazzo floor. Up on the mezzanine level, a golden retriever named Luna, usually the gentlest soul in the explosive detection unit, slammed her handler into the glass railing, knocking the wind out of him before vaulting over the turnstiles. She hit the ground running, her claws scrabbling for traction as she joined the sprint. One by one they came. Duke, Ranger, Ace, Shadow, Gunner. 7 highly trained canine. 9 units from 7 different sectors of the airport abandoned their posts. They ignored the commands of their handlers. They ignored the screams of the passengers they nearly knocked over. They ran with a synchronized, terrifying purpose. Jack watched in horror as Titan ripped the leash from his hand. The leather burned Jack's palm as it tore free. Titan launched himself forward, his arthritic hip forgotten, his old muscles firing with the power of a locomotive. "Titan, stand down!" Jack roared, chasing after him. But Titan was gone. He was leading the charge. The 8 dogs converged on Gate 4 like guided missiles. Passengers scattered, dropping luggage and diving behind rows of seats. The chaos was absolute. The dogs were not attacking the crowd. They were hunting a specific target. Jack sprinted, his lungs burning. He saw the target before he understood it. Near the boarding counter for a private charter flight stood a couple. They looked like royalty. The man wore a cashmere coat that cost more than Jack's car. The woman was draped in furs, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. And standing slightly behind them, looking small and lost in an oversized gray parka, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6. She held a dirty one-eyed doll by its arm. She wasn't crying. She was just staring at the floor. Titan reached her first. He skidded to a halt, his claws sparking against the tile. He didn't bite her. He didn't jump on her. He spun around, putting his back to the girl, and faced the world. He lowered his head and bared his teeth, letting out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in the chests of everyone nearby. Seconds later, the other 7 dogs arrived. They didn't pile on. They didn't fight each other. With military precision, they slotted into position around the girl. They sat on their haunches, facing outward, forming a perfect circle, a living, breathing wall of fur and muscle. The mother shrieked, "Get those beasts away from my daughter!" The father stepped forward, raising a leather briefcase as a weapon. "Don't do it!" Jack screamed as he burst through the crowd. Titan snapped his jaws inches from the man's expensive Italian shoes. The snap was loud enough to be heard over the sirens that were now wailing through the terminal. Police officers swarmed the area. Glocks were drawn from holsters. Tasers were leveled. Red laser dots danced across the chests of the dogs. "Control your animals or we put them down." A SWAT commander bellowed. Jack skid to a stop, his hands raised, breath heaving. "Don't shoot. Do not shoot the dogs." He looked at Titan, his partner, his best friend. The dog's eyes were wild, but they weren't crazy. They were desperate. Titan looked at Jack, and for a split second, the growling stopped. The look in the dog's eyes was clear. "Help us." 2 hours earlier, the world had made sense. Jack sat on a metal bench in the canine break room, holding a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. Titan lay at his feet, chewing on a rubber Kong toy with the slow, deliberate movements of an old soldier. The room smelled of wet dog and floor wax. It was a sanctuary away from the madness of the holiday travelers. Jack reached down and rubbed the thick fur around Titan's neck. "You know you don't have to be a tough guy today," Jack said softly. "I saw you limping after that cargo search in Sector 7. Titan paused his chewing and huffed a breath through his nose, resting his heavy head on Jack's boot. The bond between them wasn't just affection, it was survival. 9 years. They had survived shootouts in the South Side. They had tracked a kidnapper through a blizzard in 2018. They had found enough fentanyl to kill half the city. Jack was a widower. His wife Sarah had passed 5 years ago from cancer. Since then, the empty house was only bearable because of the clicking of Titan's claws on the hardwood floor. "We are done, buddy." Jack continued fishing a folded paper from his pocket. It was the retirement authorization. Signed, sealed, effective at midnight. I bought a cabin up in Wisconsin. No stairs, just a big flat yard and a lake. You can chase ducks until your legs fall off. The door to the break room swung open and Captain Vargas walked in. Vargas was a bureaucrat in a uniform, a man who cared more about metrics and wait times than instinct. He looked stressed. "Sterling, get your dog ready. We have a VIP transfer happening at Gate 4, State Department clearance." Jack frowned, checking his watch. "In this weather, nothing is flying out. Who is the VIP?" Vargas waved a hand dismissively. "Some biotech mogul and his family. Marcus Winston. He's donating big money to the city's defense fund. The mayor wants him treated like gold. Fast track through TSA. No hassling him about liquids or shoes. Just a visual sweep and get them on their private jet." Titan suddenly stopped chewing. He sat up, his ears swiveling toward the door even though it was closed. He gave a low whine. Jack looked at his dog. "He hates the name Winston," Jack joked dryly. "Or maybe he smells your cheap cologne, Vargas." Vargas didn't smile. "Just get it done, Sterling. We don't need any incidents. This guy has lawyers who eat cops for breakfast." Jack stood up and clipped the lead onto Titan's tactical vest. As they walked out into the concourse, Jack felt a strange heaviness in his gut. It wasn't the retirement jitters. It was Titan. The dog was walking too close to him, pressing his shoulder against Jack's leg. This was a behavior Titan only did when the environment felt hostile. They reached the security checkpoint near Gate 4. The Winston family was already there, bypassing the long lines of angry travelers. Marcus Winston was tall, silver-haired, and radiated the kind of arrogance that comes with old money. His wife Elena was busy typing on her phone, ignoring everything around her. And then there was the girl. Jack watched them from 30 feet away. The girl was lagging behind, dragging her feet. She looked small for her age. She was wearing a gray parka that looked lived-in dirty at the cuffs. It didn't match the pristine designer luggage her parents were wheeling. Titan pulled on the leash, not toward them, but parallel to them. He was sniffing the air, furiously tasting it. Easy, Titan, Jack murmured. He watched the TSA agents wave the family through. No metal detector, no pat down, just a smile and a nod. The girl didn't look up. She didn't look around at the Christmas decorations or the giant tree in the atrium. She looked like a ghost. Something isn't right, Jack whispered to himself. He walked up to the TSA supervisor, a man he had known for years. Hey, Bill, why the free pass on the kid? She looks off. Bill shrugged. Diplomatic immunity level clearance, Jack. I was told to look the other way unless she pulls out a bazooka. Don't start trouble on your last night. Jack looked back at Titan. The dog was trembling. Not from cold, from a suppressed energy that was building up like steam in a boiler. Titan looked at Jack and gave a short, sharp bark. It was a question. Are we going to do something? Jack pulled him back. Not our call, buddy. Come on, let's finish the perimeter sweep. He turned away. He ignored the knot in his stomach. He ignored the way Titan kept looking back over his shoulder at the little girl disappearing toward Gate 4. It was the biggest mistake of his career, and he was about to pay for it. The sound of the slide racking back on a Glock 19 snapped Jack back to the frozen present. The flashback dissolved into the harsh white lights of the terminal standoff. We have a situation, the SWAT commander yelled. Handlers, control your animals, or we will neutralize them. This is the final warning. The scene at Gate 4 had escalated from chaos to a full-blown crisis. The 8 dogs sat like stone statues. Their circle was unbreakable. Inside the ring, the little girl Sophie stood motionless. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking at Titan. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the thick fur on his shoulder. Titan didn't flinch. He leaned into her touch. Marcus Winston, the father, was purple with rage. He was shouting at a terrified airline manager while pointing a finger at Jack. This is assault, he screamed. I am a personal friend of the governor. I will have every single one of these mutts put down, and I will have your badges. My daughter is terrified. Look at her. She is in shock. Elena, the mother, was sobbing dramatically for the camera's phone held high recording the police. They are hurting my baby. Why won't you shoot them? They are wild animals. Jack looked at the girl. She didn't look terrified of the dog. She looked terrified of the parents. Captain Vargas came running up his face, pale and sweating. Sterling, get Titan out of there now. You are causing an international incident. Jack stepped forward, his hands raised, showing his palms to the SWAT team. Put the guns down, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline hammering in his throat. You have 10 seconds, Sterling, Vargas yelled. Jack walked right up to the edge of the circle of dogs. He was 3 feet from Titan. The dog's lips were curled back, exposing teeth that could crush bone. A low growl rumbled from Titan's throat, directed at Jack. Jack stopped. Titan had never growled at him. Never. This wasn't aggression. This was a warning. Do not make me move. Jack looked at the formation. He had seen this before. In the military. It wasn't a police containment circle. It was a phalanx. A defensive perimeter used to protect a high-value asset while waiting for extraction. Who taught them this? These dogs trained separately. They had never worked a unit drill together. Yet here they were, perfectly spaced eyes scanning different sectors covering 360 degrees. Titan, Jack said softly. I can't protect you if you don't stand down. They are going to kill you, boy. Please. Titan didn't blink. He held his ground. Marcus Winston stepped toward the circle, swinging his briefcase at a Springer Spaniel named Ace. Get away, you filthy cur, Ace snapped. The sound of teeth clicking together was sharp. Marcus jumped back, losing his balance and falling onto the carpet. Shoot them, he screamed from the floor. Shoot them all. The SWAT commander tightened his finger on the trigger, taking the shot. No, Jack dove. He didn't dive at the suspect. He didn't dive at the girl. He dove in front of his dog. He landed on his knees, shielding Titan's body with his own chest. He looked up the barrel of the SWAT rifle. If you shoot him, you go through me, Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. The terminal went silent. The only sound was the heavy panting of the dogs and the distant wail of the wind outside. Captain Vargas stared at Jack. Are you insane, Sterling? You are throwing away your pension, your career, your life for a dog that's malfunctioning. He's not malfunctioning. Jack said, standing up slowly but keeping his hand on Titan's neck. Look at them, Vargas. Look at the formation. They aren't attacking the girl. They are protecting her from what Elena shrieked. We are her parents. Jack looked at the girl, really looked at her. He saw the way she didn't move toward her mother. He saw the way she clutched the doll. He saw the shoes she was wearing. They were canvas sneakers, summer shoes, in a Chicago winter. Her parents were wearing Italian leather boots lined with fur. I want 5 minutes, Jack said to Vargas. You have 0 minutes, Vargas spat. 5 minutes to check the girl, Jack insisted, his voice rising. If I'm wrong, I surrender my badge. I surrender my gun. You can arrest me for reckless endangerment. I will plead guilty. But if 8 of the best noses in the country all decided this kid is the mission, then we are missing something. Vargas hesitated. He looked at the cameras. He looked at the crowd. Shooting a decorated officer and a hero dog on Christmas Eve was a PR nightmare he couldn't survive. 2 minutes, Vargas hissed. And then I want you in cuffs. Jack turned to the circle. He didn't need to speak. He looked at Titan. Trust me. Slowly, miraculously, Titan sat back. He didn't break the circle, but he made a gap just wide enough for Jack to pass. The other dogs lowered their heads but kept their eyes on Marcus and Elena. Jack stepped inside the ring of fur and teeth. He knelt down until he was eye level with the little girl. Up close, she smelled of old fabric and something else, something familiar, something that tickled a memory in the back of Jack's brain, but he couldn't place it. Hi, Sophie, Jack said, reading the luggage tag on her backpack. I'm Jack. I'm not going to hurt you. The girl didn't speak. Her eyes darted to Marcus, then back to the floor. Is that your doll? Jack asked, pointing to the ragged toy. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Can I see it? She pulled it tighter to her chest, shaking her head. Jack's heart sank. He pulled out his portable scanner, a handheld wand used for detecting chemical traces. It beeped as he turned it on. I just need to wave this over you, okay? It's like a magic wand. He ran the scanner over her coat. Nothing. He ran it over the doll. Nothing. No explosives. No drugs. No radioactive material. Marcus scrambled to his feet, brushing off his coat. Satisfied detective, you have traumatized a child for nothing. Jack felt the cold sweat of failure. He looked at Titan. You were wrong, buddy. For the first time, you were wrong. Jack stood up defeated. He unclipped his radio. He reached for his badge. Time's up, Sterling Vargas shouted. And then it happened. Titan broke his sit. He walked over to the girl. He didn't sniff the doll. He didn't sniff her shoes. He pressed his wet nose right against the seam of her dirty gray coat. He inhaled deeply, loud and long. And then he licked her hand. It wasn't a normal lick. It was a specific gesture. A signal Titan used to use years ago when he found a survivor in the rubble. It was the signal for found. The little girl dropped the doll. She buried her hands in Titan's fur, and for the first time she made a sound. She didn't speak. She let out a sob that broke the heart of everyone who heard it, and as she cried, her hand moved. Her fingers curled and uncurled in a specific rhythm against Titan's neck. Jack froze. He knew that hand signal. It wasn't a child's fidgeting. It was K9 tactical sign language. She was signaling stay, danger, close. Jack looked at the coat again. He grabbed the hem of the dirty gray parka. Hey, what are you doing? Marcus yelled, charging forward. Jack didn't hesitate. He ripped the lining of the coat open. The fabric tore with a loud rip. There was nothing hidden inside. No drugs, no chips. But there was a patch sewn into the inner lining. A faded yellow patch with black stitching. Jack read the name stitched on the patch, and the world stopped spinning. He forgot the crowd. He forgot Vargas. He forgot the gun pointed at him. The patch said K9 Unit, Rex, Handler Sargentine, Mike Donovan. Jack stared at the name. Mike Donovan, his best friend, his partner from the academy. Mike Donovan, who had died in a botched raid 3 years ago. Mike Donovan, whose body was found, but whose daughter had disappeared 6 months later. Jack looked at the girl's face, really looked at her bone structure. The eyes, they weren't strangers, they were Mike's eyes. This isn't Sophie Winston, Jack whispered, his voice trembling with rage. He stood up and spun around, his hand dropping to his weapon. This is Sophie Donovan. And you, he pointed at Marcus, you are a dead man. The shockwave of the revelation hit the terminal, but before anyone could move, Marcus smiled. A cold, dead smile. He didn't reach for a gun. He lifted his left hand. In his palm was a small black remote with a single red button. His thumb was hovering over it. Call off the dogs, he said, his voice devoid of the fake accent he had used earlier. Or everyone in this terminal stops breathing in 30 seconds. It wasn't a bomb. It was a release trigger. And looking at the seal on the briefcase Elena was holding, Jack realized with horror what they were really carrying. It wasn't money. It wasn't drugs. It was a canister. Biohazard. The standoff had just turned into a war, and the only thing standing between a massacre and the innocent was one man and 8 dogs who had known the truth all along. The standoff at Gate 4 had frozen time. The air in the terminal was thick with the smell of fear and ozone, a static charge that raised the hair on the back of Jack Sterling's neck. He stood at the edge of the circle of 8 dogs, his hand gripping Titan's collar, his heart hammering a rhythm that felt dangerously out of sync with reality. The SWAT team had their rifles raised black barrels, steady fingers resting on triggers that could end his best friend's life in a fraction of a second. The noise of the crowd had dulled to a white noise hum, a backdrop to the terrifying intimacy of the moment between a man and his dog. Jack tightened his grip on the leather collar. He leaned down, his voice a low rasp meant only for the animal's ears. Titan, listen to me. You have to stand down. We are going to get shot. Please, buddy. Heel. He pulled. It was a command he had given 10,000 times, a command that Titan obeyed with the snap precision of a machine. But this time, the 90-pound German Shepherd was an anchor. Titan didn't budge. His muscles were locked, turned to stone under his thick fur. Jack pulled harder, desperation lending him strength, trying to drag the dog away from the little girl, to break the formation and defuse the situation before the SWAT commander gave the order to fire. And then it happened. The sound that broke Jack's heart. Titan turned his head. He looked directly at Jack. His lips curled back, revealing canines that were yellowed with age but still lethal. And he growled. It wasn't a play growl. It wasn't the alert growl he used for suspects. It was a guttural, vibrating threat directed at Jack, his handler, his partner, his father. For 9 years, through gunfire and blizzards and nights so cold they huddled together for warmth in the back of the cruiser, Titan had never not once shown aggression toward Jack. They were 2 halves of the same soul, but in this moment, Titan was drawing a line in the sand. He was telling Jack with absolute terrifying clarity that if Jack tried to move him, Jack would become the enemy. Jack let go of the collar as if it were red-hot iron. He stepped back, his hands shaking. The betrayal stung his eyes, but his mind, the mind of a detective who had spent 20 years reading the streets, kicked into overdrive. Titan wasn't malfunctioning. Dogs didn't go crazy in synchronized formation. Look at them. Jack scanned the other 7 dogs. They weren't looking at the parents. They weren't looking at the police. They weren't even looking at the little girl's face. They were inhaling. Titan's nose was working furiously, expanding and contracting, pulling in the air around the girl like he was trying to decipher a complex code. He wasn't guarding a person. He was guarding a scent. Jack's eyes snapped to the girl. Sophie. That was the name on her backpack tag. Sophie Winston, according to the screaming man in the cashmere coat. Jack forced himself to ignore the guns pointed at his back and the screaming mother. He forced himself to look at the child, really look at her. He had been a cop long enough to know that the devil is in the details, and the details of this family portrait were all wrong. Marcus Winston, the father, was wearing a bespoke wool coat that probably cost $5,000. His boots were Italian leather polished to a mirror shine, lined with pristine shearling. Elena, the mother, was draped in furs, her hands manicured, clutching a designer bag that was worth more than Jack's annual salary. They were the picture of elite, untouchable wealth. Then there was Sophie. She stood in the center of the circle, shivering slightly. She was wearing a gray parka that was at least 2 sizes too big. The sleeves covered her hands completely. The fabric wasn't just cheap, it was worn. There were grease stains on the hem, the kind you get from brushing against a car door in a garage. The zipper was frayed. It smelled of mildew and old rain, a sharp, musty odor that cut through the expensive perfume her mother was wearing. Why would a billionaire dress his daughter in a coat that looked like it came from a donation bin? Jack's gaze moved down to her feet. Canvas sneakers, thin summer sneakers with pink laces that were gray with dirt. It was December in Chicago. It was 10 degrees below zero outside. No parent, no matter how negligent, would put a child in canvas shoes in a blizzard. Her ankles were bare red from the cold. And then there was the silence. A normal 6-year-old girl surrounded by 8 snarling wolves and 20 shouting men with guns should be hysterical. She should be screaming for her mother. She should be crying. She should be trying to run. Sophie was doing none of those things. She stood perfectly still, her small body rigid. Her eyes were wide, enormous pools of blue that took in everything, but they were dry. There were no tears. It was the 1,000-yard stare of a soldier who had seen too much combat. It was the dissociation of a victim who had learned that making noise only brings pain. She wasn't shocked. She was practiced. She stood there clutching that rag doll like it was a lifeline, but she didn't look at her parents for comfort. In fact, Jack noticed with a jolt of realization she was leaning away from them. Every time Marcus took a step forward to scream at the police, Sophie flinched and took a micro step backward closer to Titan's teeth. She feels safer with the wolves than she does with the shepherds, Jack thought. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a VIP family dispute. This was a crime scene in progress. But he had no proof. He had no probable cause. All he had was a growling dog and a gut feeling that was screaming at him to stop this plane. Officer Sterling. Captain Vargas's voice boomed over the megaphone, shattering Jack's concentration. This is your final order. Secure your animal or we will fire. You have 5 seconds. Jack turned around. He saw the laser sights dancing on Titan's chest. He saw the sweat on the SWAT commander's forehead. They were going to do it. They were going to kill the best dog Jack had ever known because they couldn't see what Titan was seeing. Jack didn't reach for his leash. He reached for his chest. With a slow, deliberate movement, he unpinned his gold badge. The metal felt cold and heavy in his hand. It represented 20 years of service. It represented his pension. It represented his identity. He held the badge up, letting it catch the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal. Captain Vargas Jack shouted, his voice steady and hard as granite. I am not securing this dog, because this dog is right. A gasp rippled through the crowd of onlookers. Phones were raised higher, capturing the moment a police officer went rogue. You are relieved of duty, Sterling Vargas yelled, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. Arrest him. Wait, Jack bellowed, stepping forward, placing his body directly between the SWAT team and the dogs. He held the badge out like an offering. I am placing a bet, Captain. This badge, my career, my pension, my freedom, I am betting it all right now. He pointed a shaking finger at the little girl. Look at her shoes, Vargas. Look at her coat. Does that look like the daughter of a billionaire to you? Does that look like a child who is loved? Marcus Winston stepped in, his voice dripping with venomous outrage. She has sensory issues. She refuses to wear new clothes. We struggle with it every day. How dare you judge us, you incompetent thug. I will sue this city into bankruptcy. Jack ignored him. He kept his eyes locked on Vargas. 5 minutes, Captain. Give me 5 minutes to interview the girl. Alone. Without them breathing down her neck. Absolutely not, Elena shrieked. You are not going near my daughter. You are traumatizing her. If I am wrong, Jack shouted over her, silencing the room. If I talk to her for 5 minutes and I find nothing, I will surrender. I will let you cuff me. I will let you walk me out of here, and I will never wear a uniform again. I will plead guilty to reckless endangerment. You can throw me in a cell and throw away the key. The terminal fell silent. The stakes were absolute. Every cop in the room knew what Jack was offering. He was offering his life. Vargas hesitated. He looked at the frantic parents. He looked at the silent girl. He looked at the 8 dogs who were sitting like statues watching the exchange with an intelligence that was unnerving. He knew Jack Sterling. Jack was a pain in the ass, but he was the best detective in the unit. He didn't bet on losing hands. And Vargas saw the shoes, the canvas sneakers in the snow. It was a small detail, but in police work, small details were the difference between a conviction and a corpse. You have 2 minutes, Sterling Vargas hissed, lowering his megaphone. 2 minutes. And then if you don't have something concrete, I am personally putting you in irons. 2 minutes. Jack agreed. He turned his back on his commanding officer. He turned his back on the guns. He faced the circle of dogs. He looked at Titan. The dog's ears were flat against his head, his lips still curled. "Trust me, buddy," Jack whispered. "I need to get in." Titan stared at him for a long heartbeat. Then slowly the growl faded from his throat. The dog shifted his weight and took one step back, creating a gap in the wall of fur just wide enough for a man to pass through. Jack stepped into the circle. The smell inside the ring of dogs was intense musk-wet fur and the metallic tang of adrenaline. But beneath it all, as he knelt down on the cold tile floor, Jack smelled what Titan smelled. It was coming from the girl. It wasn't just mildew. It was the smell of old engine oil, the smell of gun oil, the smell of a specific brand of leather polish that only cops used on their holsters. It was a scent profile that didn't belong in a nursery or a private school. It belonged in a precinct. Jack lowered himself until he was eye level with Sophie. Up close, she looked even more fragile. Her skin was translucent, pale as milk, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She gripped the doll so tight her knuckles were white. "Hi, Sophie," Jack said softly, keeping his hands visible and open. "I'm Jack. I'm a friend of the dog's." Sophie didn't speak. She didn't even blink. She stared at a spot on the floor near Jack's left knee. "They like you. You know." Jack continued, his voice a low hum. "Titan, the big one there. He usually doesn't like anyone, but he likes you. He thinks you're important." Nothing. Not a twitch. Jack glanced at the parents standing outside the circle. Marcus was checking his watch. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle was jumping in his cheek. He wasn't looking at his daughter with concern. He was looking at the exit. He was calculating the time. "Sophie," Jack said, leaning in a fraction of an inch closer, "I like your coat. It looks very warm." At the mention of the coat, Sophie flinched. It was subtle, just a tiny spasm in her shoulders, but Jack saw it. "Can I see your doll?" Jack asked. Sophie shook her head violently, pulling the ragged toy against her chest, crossing her arms over it in a protective X. "Okay, that's okay," Jack said quickly. "I don't need to see the doll." He reached into his belt and pulled out a small black wand. It was a portable chemical scanner, usually used to swipe luggage for explosive residue. "I have this magic wand here," Jack said, trying to keep his voice playful despite the sweat running down his back. "It just makes a little beep. I'm going to wave it over your coat. Okay, just to make sure you didn't bring any pixie dust into the airport." He didn't wait for permission. He waved the scanner over her shoulder, then down her arm. The machine stayed silent. No explosives, no nitrates. He moved it over the doll. Nothing. He moved it over her shoes. Nothing. Jack felt a cold stone drop in his stomach. He had 60 seconds left. He had bet his life on finding something, and the scanner was reading clean. Satisfied, Marcus sneered from outside the circle. "You are harassing a disabled child." Jack ignored him. He looked at Sophie's eyes. They were terrified, darting left and right like a trapped bird. She wanted to say something. He could see the muscles in her throat working, trying to push sound out, but fear had clamped her vocal cords shut. "Sophie," Jack whispered, desperate now, "you don't have to talk. But if you're scared, if these people aren't who they say they are, I need you to give me a sign. Blink twice. Squeeze your hand. Anything." Sophie stared at him. Her lip trembled, but she remained frozen. 1 minute, Sterling Vargas shouted, "Wrap it up." Jack felt the weight of failure crushing him. He had been wrong. Titan was wrong. It was just a weird coincidence. Just a rich kid in a dirty coat and a dog with a brain tumor making him act crazy. "I'm sorry," Jack whispered to the girl. "I'm sorry I scared you." He started to stand up. He prepared himself to turn around to hold out his wrists for the handcuffs. He prepared to watch Titan get dragged away by animal control. And then a hand touched his arm. It was Titan. The dog had moved forward. He nudged Jack's elbow out of the way. He pressed his wet black nose directly against the seam of the girl's dirty gray parka, right where the zipper met the fabric. He inhaled. A long, loud, shuddering breath. And then Titan did something that made the hair on Jack's arms stand straight up. He didn't bark. He didn't bite. He licked the girl's hand. It was a single deliberate lick across her knuckles. Sophie dropped the doll. It hit the floor with a soft thud. Her hands, now free, didn't reach for her parents. They reached for the dog. She buried her fingers deep into Titan's thick neck for grabbing onto him like he was a life raft in a storm. And then she made a sound. It wasn't a word, it was a sob, a ragged, broken noise that had been held inside for a very long time. As she cried, Jack saw her hand moving against Titan's black fur. Her small fingers were curling and uncurling, index finger up, palm flat, fist clenched, index finger up, palm flat, fist clenched. Jack froze. His breath stopped in his lungs. That wasn't random fidgeting. That wasn't a nervous tick. Jack recognized the rhythm. He recognized the pattern. Every canine handler in the academy learned it in the first week. It was tactical hand signals, silent commands used when you couldn't speak over the radio during a raid. She was signaling stay, danger, close. Jack looked at the little girl with new eyes. A 6-year-old civilian didn't know canine tactical signals. A random child didn't know how to command a police dog to hold position, unless she had been taught, unless she had grown up watching a handler train his dog in the living room. Jack grabbed the hem of the dirty gray parka. "Hey, Marcus!" shouted, lunging forward, breaking the perimeter. "Get your hands off her!" Jack didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for permission. He gripped the lining of the coat and ripped. The old fabric tore with a loud, satisfying sound, exposing the inner insulation. There were no drugs inside. There were no diamonds, but there was a patch. Sewn clumsily into the inner lining hidden against the girl's heart was a faded yellow rectangle of fabric with black embroidery. It was a unit patch, the kind cops trade with each other. Jack read the name stitched on the patch, and the world stopped spinning. The noise of the airport vanished. The threat of arrest vanished. All that was left was a cold, white, hot rage. The patch read, K9 Unit, Rex, Handler Sargentin, Mike Donovan. Jack stared at the name. Mike Donovan. His best friend. The man he had gone through the academy with. The man who had died in a botched raid 3 years ago. The man whose body had been found in a warehouse, but whose daughter... Jack looked up at the girl's face. He looked past the dirt, past the trauma. He saw the shape of her jaw. He saw the color of her eyes. They weren't strangers. They were Mike's eyes. This wasn't Sophie Winston. Jack stood up. He turned slowly to face Marcus Winston. His hand dropped to his holster, and this time there was no hesitation. "This is Sophie Donovan," Jack said, his voice carrying across the silent terminal like a judge's gavel. "And you," he pointed a shaking finger at the man in the cashmere coat, "you are a dead man." The air inside the terminal felt thin and recycled, as if 50,000 people had already breathed it all away, leaving nothing for Jack Sterling but carbon dioxide and regret. He held the chemical scanner in his right hand. It was a blocky black device the size of a brick with a short antenna that sniffed for the molecular signatures of nitrates, C4 heroin, and cocaine. It was the gold standard of airport security. It did not lie. It did not have hunches. It dealt in the absolute binary of yes and no. Jack pressed the power button. The device emitted a high-pitched chirp that seemed deafening in the sudden silence of the circle. A small green LED light flickered to life, indicating the sensor was warming up. Jack looked at the little girl. Sophie. She was still trembling, a vibration so fine it was almost invisible unless you were holding the fabric of her coat like Jack was. "Okay, Sophie." Jack whispered, his voice cracking with a dryness he couldn't swallow away. "I am going to wave this near you. It won't hurt. It just smells the air." He moved the wand toward her shoulder. His hand was shaking. He needed a hit. He needed the machine to scream. He needed a red light. He needed a reason to justify why 8 police dogs had just engaged in a mutiny that would end his career. He swept the sensor over the left side of the dirty gray parka. He moved it slowly, giving the intake fan time to pull in the particles trapped in the weave of the fabric. Silence. The green light stayed steady, a mockingly cheerful emerald glow. Jack grit his teeth. Maybe it was the angle. Maybe the air conditioning was blowing the scent away. He moved the wand down her arm toward the cuff where the grease stains were. If she had been around bomb-making materials or a meth lab, the residue would be there. It stuck to everything. He swept the cuff. Nothing. He moved the wand lower to her legs. The canvas sneakers. The pink laces that were gray with grime. Nothing. Sweat broke out on Jack's forehead, stinging his eyes. He could feel the weight of 1,000 stares pressing into his back. He could feel Captain Vargas checking his watch, counting down the seconds until he could tackle Jack to the ground. He could feel Titan's eyes on him, expecting him to fix this. Jack looked at the doll, the ragged, one-eyed thing clutched against the girl's chest. That had to be it. That was the classic move. Hide the drugs in the toy. Hide the diamonds in the stuffing. Can I just check your friend Jack? Asked, gently pointing the wand at the doll. Sophie didn't move. She didn't offer the doll. She stared at Jack's boots. Jack didn't force it. He moved the wand close to the doll's fabric head. He swept it over the torso. He swept it over the missing eye. The machine remained silent. No, 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 no. Jack tapped the side of the device with his palm. Maybe the battery was low. Maybe the sensor was clogged. He waved it through the air again furiously. It was working fine. It just wasn't finding anything. He checked the girl's back. He checked the hood of her coat. He even waved it near her hair. 0. Clean. The 5 minutes felt like 5 years, but eventually the silence stretched too thin and snapped. Are you quite finished? Marcus Winston's voice sliced through the tension. It was smooth-cultured and dripping with acid. Or would you like to strip search my 6-year-old daughter right here on the carpet while the world watches? Jack lowered the scanner. His arm felt like lead. He looked at the readout one last time, praying for a delayed reaction, but the screen was blank. There is nothing here, Jack whispered. He looked at Titan. The old dog was still sitting, his ears alert, his eyes fixed on the girl with an intensity that burned. You lied to me, Jack thought, looking at the animal. For the first time in 9 years, you lied to me. Doubt crashed into Jack like a physical wave. He thought about Titan's hips, the way he struggled to get into the SUV lately, the way he sometimes stared at walls in the house for no reason. Was this it? Was this the canine dementia the vet had warned him about? Had Titan's brain finally misfired, scrambling a scent signal, turning an innocent child into a threat? Oh God, Jack thought. I just held a SWAT team at bay because my dog is senile. He looked at the other dogs. They were still holding the line, but their ears were flickering. They were looking at Titan, waiting for a cue. They had followed the Alpha, but the Alpha was wrong. Captain Vargas stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floor. That is it, Sterling Vargas barked, his voice tight with fury. Step away from the girl. Put your hands behind your head. You are done. The spell broke. The crowd, which had been holding its breath, suddenly exhaled into a roar of outrage. The cell phones were held higher. The live stream comments were scrolling too fast to read, but Jack knew what they said. Monster, tyrant, child abuser. Let them go, a woman shouted from the back of the crowd. He is harassing them, a man yelled, throwing a half-empty water bottle. It arched through the air and landed with a wet thud near Jack's feet. Shame, 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 the crowd began to chant. Marcus Winston seized the moment. He stepped into the circle. His chest puffed out, his face a mask of righteous indignation. He put a protective hand on Sophie's shoulder, not comforting her, but claiming her. You see this, he shouted to the cameras, pointing at Jack. This is what happens when authority goes unchecked. This man terrified my child. He held us hostage with wild animals. I want his badge number. I want his name. I want him gone. Elena Winston rushed forward, dropping to her knees and hugging Sophie, theatrically wailing for the audience. My poor baby. My poor sweet baby. Look at her. She is traumatized. Sophie didn't hug back. She stood rigid in the circle of adults who were using her as a prop in their play. Jack stood up slowly. His knees popped. He clipped the useless scanner back onto his belt. He felt small. He felt old. He looked at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the other officers. He had failed. He had bet everything on a feeling, and the feeling was a ghost. I am sorry, Jack said, his voice hollow. He looked at Sophie. I am so sorry, little one. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. He turned to face Vargas. He unbuckled his gun belt. The heavy leather rig slid from his hips. He placed it on the floor. He took his badge, the gold shield he had polished every morning for 2 decades, and laid it next to the gun. Call them off. Sterling Vargas ordered his hand on his handcuffs. Jack looked at Titan. The dog was looking at him confused. Titan whined a high-pitched sound of distress. He didn't understand why his human was surrendering. He didn't understand why the threat was still standing there, smiling. Heel Titan Jack choked out the command. Titan didn't move. He looked from Jack to the girl to the coat. He barked once, a sharp, frustrated sound. I said heel. Jack shouted, tears stinging his eyes. It's over. We were wrong. Titan's ears went flat. He looked at Jack with a profound sadness. It was the look of a partner who knows he is being abandoned. The crowd booed louder as two officers grabbed Jack's arms, twisting them behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. Get those dogs out of here, Vargas yelled at the other handlers. The other officers moved in, grabbing the collars of their dogs, dragging them away. The circle broke. The phalanx dissolved. Marcus Winston smiled. It was a small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. He adjusted his expensive coat. Come along, Sophie, he said, his voice hard. We have a plane to catch. He grabbed the girl's hand. He didn't hold it gently. He gripped it, hard. Jack saw Sophie's knuckles turn white. He saw her wince. Wait, Jack said, struggling against the cuffs. He is hurting her. Shut up, Sterling Vargas hissed, pushing Jack toward the exit. You have done enough damage. Marcus pulled the girl. She stumbled, her canvas sneakers sliding on the smooth floor. She looked back. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked at Titan. Titan was being dragged away by an animal control officer who had looped a catch pole around his neck. The old dog was thrashing, choking, fighting to get back to the girl. And in that moment, amidst the noise and the shame and the failure, Jack saw it. He saw the way Sophie looked at the dog. It wasn't the look of a child looking at a pet. It was the look of a soldier looking at their squad leader. And then he saw her hand. Her free hand, the one not being crushed by Marcus, was hanging at her side. Her fingers were moving. Tap, tap, swipe, fist. Jack stopped fighting the officers. He froze. He stared at that tiny hand. Tap, tap, swipe, fist. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was rhythm. It was deliberate. Jack's mind raced back 10 years to the police academy, to the canine training grounds in the mud and the raining. He remembered the hand signals, silent commands. Tap tap meant attention, swipe meant search, fist meant hold. But that wasn't what she was doing. She was doing something else, something older, something specific to one unit. Jack blinked, clearing the sweat from his eyes. He watched her fingers again. Index finger up, palm flat, fist clenched. Stay, danger, close. She was signaling the dog. A 6-year-old girl in a dirty coat with canvas shoes was giving tactical hand signals to a police dog. A civilian child doesn't know that. A rich kid from the suburbs doesn't know that. Only one kind of kid knows that. A kid who grew up in a house where the dog was a partner. A kid who watched her father train in the backyard every Sunday. The scanner had failed. The eyes had failed. But the language of the pack, that was real. Jack felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it nearly knocked him over. He wasn't crazy. Titan wasn't senile. The machine was wrong because the machine was looking for the wrong thing. It wasn't about what was on the girl. It was about who the girl was. Stop! Jack roared. He planted his feet, twisting his body with such force that the two officers holding him stumbled. Vargas turned around annoyed. What now, Sterling? Jack ignored him. He looked at Titan. The dog had stopped fighting the catch pole. He was staring at Jack, waiting. Titan. Jack yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. Break! It was the release command. The emergency override. The word that meant ignore all protocols, ignore all restraint. Attack! The animal control officer didn't stand a chance. Titan twisted his massive neck and the catch pole flew out of the man's hands. The dog didn't run at Marcus. He didn't run at the mother. He ran at the girl. Jack screamed, realizing his mistake. But Titan wasn't attacking. He slammed into Sophie's legs, knocking her away from Marcus, breaking the man's grip on her hand. Sophie fell onto the carpet. Titan stood over her, straddling her body, shielding her with his own. He snapped his jaws at Marcus, driving him back, and then Titan did the one thing that changed everything, the one thing that no scanner could detect. He lowered his head and pressed his wet nose right into the seam of the dirty gray parka, right where the zipper met the fabric. He inhaled, a deep, shuddering breath, and then he licked her hand. Once, twice. Sophie dropped the doll. She reached up and grabbed Titan's fur, burying her face in his neck, and she screamed. Not a scream of fear, a scream of recognition. Rex. She sobbed. The name echoed through the silent terminal. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. Rex. Rex was dead. Rex had died 3 years ago alongside his handler, Sergeant Mike Donovan, Jack's best friend. But Sophie. Sophie was Mike Donovan's daughter. Jack looked at the coat, the dirty, oversized parka. He had scanned it for drugs. He had scanned it for bombs. But he hadn't looked at it. He lunged forward, breaking free from the shocked officers. He ran toward the circle. "Get back!" Marcus screamed, reaching into his pocket. Jack didn't care. He slid onto his knees beside the girl and the dog. He grabbed the hem of the coat. "Let me see," Jack gasped. Sophie didn't fight him. She lifted her arm. Jack ripped the lining. The fabric tore with a sickening sound. There was no money inside. There were no diamonds. But sewn clumsily into the silk lining hidden against the heart of the child was a patch, a faded yellow rectangle with black embroidery. Jack read the words, and his vision blurred with tears. K9 Unit. Rex. Handler Sergeant Mike Donovan. It was Mike's unit patch, the one he wore on his tactical vest, the vest he died in. Jack looked up at the girl's face. He looked past the dirt, past the fear. He saw the chin. He saw the eyes. They were Mike's eyes. This wasn't a rich tourist. This wasn't a random child. This was Sophie Donovan, the girl who had vanished 6 months ago, the girl everyone thought was dead. And these people... Jack turned his head slowly to look at Marcus Winston. The man wasn't smiling anymore. His hand was out of his pocket. He wasn't holding a phone. He was holding a small black remote with a single red button. The crowd gasped. Jack stood up, his hands still cuffed behind his back, his eyes burning with a rage that could set the world on fire. "That isn't your daughter," Jack whispered, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Marcus smirked. A cold, dead expression. "Maybe not," he said, thumb hovering over the button. "But she is my insurance policy. Call off the dog officer, or I press this and everyone in this terminal dies. It wasn't a bomb." Jack looked at the briefcase Elena was clutching. It was sealed with biohazard tape. The scanner hadn't found explosives because it wasn't an explosive. It was a biological weapon. And Sophie wasn't just a hostage. She was the shield. Jack looked at Titan. The dog wasn't moving. He was staying, just like Sophie had told him to. The scan had failed, but the mission had just begun. The chemical scanner sat heavy and useless in Jack Sterling's hand, a black brick of plastic that had just betrayed him in front of the entire world. The little green light on the device was mocking him, a steady, unblinking eye that said, "Innocent, innocent, innocent." Jack felt the weight of 20 years of service crumbling into dust. The terminal was a cacophony of jeers and insults, the crowd smelling blood in the water. They saw a bully with a badge harassing a frightened family, and Jack could not blame them. To the untrained eye, that is exactly what it looked like. Captain Vargas was already moving his hand, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt, his face a mask of furious disappointment. "You are finished!" Sterling Vargas hissed, his voice cutting through the noise. "Put the device on the floor. Step away from the child." Jack felt a hollowness in his chest, a cold void where his instincts used to be. He looked at Titan. The old German shepherd was still holding the line, his body a rigid statue of muscle and fur, but his ears had flattened. The dog looked confused. He looked at Jack, waiting for the next command, waiting for the praise that usually followed a search. But there was no praise today. There was only the crushing silence of failure. "I am sorry," Jack whispered to the dog. "I trusted you, buddy, but we missed it." Satisfied, Marcus Winston sneered, adjusting the collar of his expensive cashmere coat. His voice was smooth-cultured and dripping with triumph. "You have terrified my daughter, you have delayed my flight, and you have made a spectacle of yourself. I will have your pension for this, officer. I will have the shirt off your back." Marcus stepped forward, his Italian leather boots clicking sharply on the terrazzo floor. He did not look at Sophie with concern. He did not kneel down to comfort the girl who had been standing in the center of a wolf pack for 20 minutes. Instead, he reached out and grabbed her arm. It was not a gentle grab. It was a snatch. His fingers dug into the fabric of the dirty gray parka, gripping the thin arm beneath with a force that made Sophie stumble. "Come along, Sophie," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We are leaving this zoo." Sophie didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply went limp, a dead weight in his grip, her canvas sneakers sliding across the polished floor with a quiet squeak. She looked at the floor, her body resigned to the force pulling her away. I'm not seeing. The rag doll in her hand dangled loosely, its button eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Jack watched them go. He felt the handcuffs clicking against his own wrists in his imagination. It was over, but Titan wasn't done. The old dog did not bark. He did not lunge. He did not do any of the things a police dog is trained to do when a suspect flees. Instead, Titan dropped his body low to the ground. He went onto his belly, his paws splayed out, sliding forward across the tiles like a soldier crawling under barbed wire. It was a movement so strange, so submissive and desperate that it made Jack freeze. Police dogs dominated. They stood tall. They did not crawl. Titan slithered past Jack's legs. He ignored the other dogs who were nervously shifting their weight. He ignored the SWAT team. He ignored Marcus Winston completely. He moved straight toward the girl. Marcus was dragging Sophie away, his back turned to the dogs, confident in his victory. Sophie was trailing behind him, her head down. Titan reached her. He extended his neck, his movements slow and non-threatening. He nudged his wet black nose against her trailing hand. It was a gentle bump, a soft inquiry. Sophie stopped. The touch seemed to send a jolt of electricity through her small frame. She stiffened her boots, digging into the floor, halting her slide. She turned her head slowly, looking down. Titan looked up at her. His amber eyes were wide, pleading. He didn't look like a weapon anymore. He looked like a friend. He looked like a memory. And then he licked her. It wasn't a slobbery, playful lick. It was methodical. Titan extended his rough pink tongue and swiped it across the back of Sophie's cold, dirty hand. Once. Twice. Then he rested his chin on her wrist, pinning her hand gently against his own paw. The terminal seemed to vanish for Sophie. The noise of the angry crowd, the shouting of the captain, the grip of the man hurting her arm, all of it faded into the background. All that existed was the warmth of the dog's breath and the rough texture of his tongue. A shudder ran through her body. It started in her shoulders and rippled down to her toes. The mask of catatonic indifference she had worn since entering the airport cracked. Her lip trembled. Her eyes, which had been dry and vacant, suddenly swam with liquid. A single tear, heavy and hot, spilled over her lash line and tracked a clean line through the grime on her cheek. She dropped the doll. The ragged toy hit the floor with a soft thud, lying abandoned between the girl's sneakers and the dog's paws. Sophie didn't reach for it. She didn't reach for her mother. She didn't try to pull her arm away from Marcus. Instead, she moved her free hand, the hand that Titan had just licked. Jack was watching. He was the only one watching. Everyone else was looking at Marcus or Vargas or their phone screens, but Jack was looking at the girl's hand resting on the dog's head. At first, it looked like a spasm. Her fingers twitched. Then she flattened her palm against the top of Titan's skull. Her fingers were spread wide, rigid. She held it for a second. Then she closed her hand into a tight fist. Then she flattened her palm again. Then the fist. Palm, fist, palm, fist. The rhythm was precise. It was mechanical. It was not the random petting of a child comforting an animal. It was a signal. Jack felt a cold spike of adrenaline punch him in the gut. His breath caught in his throat. He knew that signal. He had seen it 1,000 times. He had practiced it in the mud, in the rain, in the snow until his own hands cramped. It was the universal K9 tactical hand signal for stay. Stay. Hold position. Do not move. But it was more than that. The way she did it. The specific cadence. Open 2-3. Close 2-3. That wasn't just a command. It was a conversation. A 6-year-old girl does not know tactical hand signals. A civilian child does not know how to silently command a police dog to hold a perimeter in a hostile environment. A rich kid from the suburbs who carries a doll and wears canvas shoes in winter does not possess the muscle memory of a SWAT handler, unless she wasn't a civilian, unless she had learned it from someone who lived and breathed the job. Jack's mind raced backwards, spinning through the years. He thought of his partner, Mike Donovan. He thought of the barbecues in Mike's backyard. He thought of Mike's daughter. He remembered a little toddler sitting in the grass laughing while Mike trained his dog Rex. "Look at her," Jack Mike had said, beaming with pride. "She picks it up faster than the rookies. She speaks dog better than she speaks English." Jack stared at Sophie's hand. The signal continued. Palm, fist. She wasn't mute. She wasn't traumatized into silence. She was communicating. She was talking to the only ally she had in the room. She was telling Titan to stay. She was telling him that she was still there, that she hadn't left him. And Titan understood. The old dog didn't move a muscle. He stayed frozen under her hand, pressing his weight against her, anchoring her to the spot, making it harder for Marcus to drag her away. The realization hit Jack with the force of a physical blow. The chemical scanner had failed because it was looking for the wrong thing. It was looking for external threats. It was looking for bombs and drugs. But the threat wasn't what was on the girl. The threat was the people holding her, and the girl wasn't a stranger. She was family. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in Jack's mind. The cheap coat, the silence, the fear, the dogs breaking formation not to attack but to protect. They weren't protecting a random child, they were protecting one of their own. They recognized the body language. They recognized the signals. They recognized the daughter of a handler. Marcus gave a sharp yank on Sophie's arm, frustrated by the dog's weight. "Get away, you mangy beast," Marcus shouted, kicking at Titan. Titan took the kick to the ribs. He didn't flinch. He didn't break the stay command. He looked up at Sophie, waiting for the next order. That kick was the final straw. Jack didn't think. He didn't weigh the consequences. He didn't care about the cameras or the captain or the pension he was about to lose. The only thing that mattered was the little girl signaling for help in a language only he could hear. Jack Sterling moved. He didn't step forward. He lunged. His hand flew to his hip, not for the handcuffs, but for the service weapon he had sworn to use only in defense of life. He drew the Glock 19 in a fluid, practiced motion that blurred in the air. He leveled the barrel straight at Marcus Winston's chest. "Let her go," Jack roared, his voice shattering the atmosphere of the terminal. The crowd screamed. Passengers dove for cover. Captain Vargas froze his mouth, falling open in shock. The SWAT team swiveled their rifles, unsure of who the target was anymore. "Officer, drop the weapon." Vargas screamed, his hand going to his own gun. "Sterling, have you lost your mind?" Jack didn't waver. His grip was rock steady. His eyes were locked on Marcus. "I said let her go." Jack repeated, his voice lower, deadlier. "Step away from the girl." Marcus Winston stopped. He looked at the gun pointed at his heart. For the first time, the arrogant mask slipped. His eyes narrowed, cold and calculating. He didn't look like a terrified tourist anymore. He looked like a man assessing a threat. He didn't let go of Sophie. He pulled her closer, using her small body as a shield between him and the bullet. "You are making a very big mistake, officer," Marcus said, his voice devoid of the fake accent he had used earlier. "This is kidnapping. You are holding a diplomat at gunpoint." "She isn't your daughter," Jack said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Of course she is. Look at her. She is Sophie Winston." "No," Jack said, stepping closer, the gun never drifting. "She is signaling the dog." Jack gestured with his chin towards Sophie's hand, which was still resting on Titan's head, still making the rhythm. Palm, fist. "She is telling him to stay," Jack said. "That is a tactical K9 command. Civilians don't know that. Children don't know that. Only a handler's kid knows that." Jack looked straight into Sophie's eyes. "Your dad taught you that, didn't he, Sophie? Mike taught you that." At the sound of the name, Mike, Sophie gasped. The air rushed into her lungs with a ragged sound. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating. The wall she had built around herself crumbled completely. She looked at Jack. She looked at the gun. She looked at Titan. And then she spoke. Her voice was rusty, unused for weeks, scratching its way out of her throat like broken glass. "He is not my daddy." 5 words. 5 words that changed everything. The silence that followed was absolute. The crowd stopped screaming. The police stopped moving. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. "He is not my daddy," Sophie whispered again, louder this time, tears streaming down her face. "He stole me." Marcus's face twisted into a snarl. The facade of the wealthy father vanished instantly, replaced by the predator beneath. He tightened his grip on Sophie's arm until she cried out in pain. "Shut up, you little brat," he hissed. He reached into his coat pocket with his free hand. He didn't pull out a passport. He didn't pull out a phone. He pulled out a dead man's switch. It was a small black plastic device with a heavy spring-loaded button held down by his thumb. A wire ran from the device up his sleeve, disappearing into his expensive coat. "Back off!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with rage. Everyone back off, or I let go of the button. Jack saw the device. He recognized it instantly. It wasn't a bomb trigger for something in the terminal. It was a remote detonator. What is in the briefcase? Jack asked, his eyes shifting to the leather bag Elena was clutching. White-knuckled. Marcus smiled a cruel, terrified grin. Insurance, he said. Jack looked at Titan. The dog was vibrating with tension. He had felt the shift in Sophie. He had heard the distress. He was waiting for the release. But Jack couldn't give the command. If he sent the dog, Marcus would drop the switch. If he shot Marcus, the switch would drop. It was a stalemate, a standoff at point-blank range. But Jack had one thing Marcus didn't have. He had the truth. And he had a little girl who was done being a victim. Sophie looked at Jack. She saw the gun. She saw the fear in Marcus's eyes, and she saw Titan ready to die for her. Her hand moved on Titan's head one last time. She didn't make the fist. She didn't make the palm. She tapped her fingers twice on the dog's skull. Rapid. Hard. Tap, tap. It was the signal for watch. And then she pointed. Not at Marcus. Not at the gun. She pointed at the briefcase. Jack understood. The threat wasn't the man. The threat was the bag. We have a problem, Vargas, Jack said without looking away from Marcus. We have a hostage situation, and we have a bomb. The airport went into lockdown. The doors slammed shut. The sirens wailed. But in the center of the storm, Jack Sterling didn't move. He kept his gun trained on the man who had stolen his best friend's daughter. You aren't walking out of here, Jack said softly. Marcus tightened his thumb on the trigger. Then nobody walks out of here. The sound of the fabric tearing was louder than the sirens wailing outside. It was a sharp, violent noise that seemed to cut the tension in the terminal like a knife. Jack Sterling did not ask for permission. He did not wait for a warrant. He ignored the frantic shouting of Captain Vargas and the collective gasp of the crowd. He had bet his life on a hunch, and now he was going to collect. Vargas lunged for him, his hand grabbing Jack's shoulder, trying to spin him around. You are under arrest. Sterling, stand down right now. Jack shrugged him off with the heavy shrug of a man who has nothing left to lose. He didn't even look at his commanding officer. His eyes were locked on the gray parka. He gripped the torn nylon lining and pulled, exposing the hidden inner layer of the coat that had been pressed against the little girl's heart for months. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't cash. It wasn't a bomb schematic. It was a piece of fabric. Sewn clumsily into the lining of the dirty coat was a square of yellow material. It looked like it had been cut from an old tactical vest. The edges were frayed, but the stitching in the center was black and bold, done by a hand that knew how to suture a wound in the field, but didn't know how to embroider. Jack stared at the words stitched into the yellow square. His breath hitched in his throat. His vision blurred. The world around him, the airport, the SWAT team, the angry billionaire, it all dissolved into a tunnel of white noise. All he could see was that patch, property of Mike and Rex. The letters were uneven. The "and" was just a plus sign. But Jack knew that handwriting. He knew it better than his own. He had seen it on incident reports for 10 years. He had seen it on birthday cards. He had seen it carved into the wooden picnic table in his backyard during a 4th of July barbecue. It was Mike Donovan's handwriting. Sergeant Mike Donovan, Jack's partner, his best friend, the man who had been the best canine handler the department had ever seen. The man who had died 2 years ago in a warehouse raid gone wrong, leaving behind a legacy of heroism and a hole in Jack's life that had never healed. And Rex was Mike's dog, a legendary Belgian Malinois who was faster than a bullet and smarter than most detectives. Rex had died that same night, shielding Mike from the blast. They had been buried together. Jack's knees hit the floor. The impact jarred his spine, but he didn't feel it. He reached out with a trembling finger and traced the stitching on the patch. Mike, he whispered. He looked at the coat again. Really looked at it. It wasn't a child's coat. It was a man's tactical jacket cut down and restitched. The sleeves had been shortened. The waist had been taken in. But the smell... Jack leaned in. He buried his face in the exposed lining. He smelled it. It wasn't just old fabric. It was the smell of Hop's gun oil. It was the smell of wood smoke from Mike's cabin. It was the smell of the specific heavy-duty shampoo Mike used to wash Rex. And underneath it all, the metallic copper tang of old dried blood. This was Mike's jacket, the jacket he had been wearing the night he died, or the jacket he wore every day before that. Jack looked up at the little girl, Sophie. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at the patch. Her hand was resting on it, covering the name as if to protect it. "This is my daddy's," she whispered. Her voice was tiny, a fragile thing that barely carried over the hum of the conveyor belts, but to Jack it sounded like a thunderclap. "Your daddy," Jack choked out. "Sophie." He looked at her face. He stripped away the grime, the fear, the dark circles under her eyes. He looked at the structure of her jaw, the arch of her eyebrows. Mike Donovan didn't have a daughter named Sophie Winston. He had a daughter named Sophie Donovan, a girl who had been 4 years old when her father died, a girl who had been sent to live with a distant aunt in Ohio after the funeral, a girl who had vanished from a playground 6 months ago. The police had searched. Jack had searched. They had turned the state upside down, but the leads had gone cold. They thought she was dead. They thought she had been taken by a stranger and lost forever. But she wasn't dead. She was here, standing in Terminal 4 wearing her dead father's coat, holding a tactical perimeter with a pack of wolves. Jack turned his head slowly toward the dogs. Titan was still sitting there, his nose inches from the girl. But he wasn't just sitting. He was vibrating. A low whine was building in his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated longing. Jack looked at the other dogs. Brutus, Luna, Duke. He realized then why they had broken formation. He realized why 8 different dogs from 8 different units had all lost their minds at the exact same second. It wasn't magic. It was biology. It was history. Rex had been the alpha. In the canine unit, Rex was the king. He was the dog they all looked up to. He was the one who trained the puppies. He was the one who disciplined the young males. Every dog in this circle was connected to Rex. Titan had been Rex's running mate. They shared a kennel run for 5 years. Brutus was Rex's son from a litter 3 years ago. Luna had been trained by Mike using Rex as the demonstration dog. To these dogs, the scent on that jacket wasn't just a smell. It was a signature. It was the olfactory fingerprint of the alpha. The girl hadn't washed the coat. For 6 months while she was held captive, while she was dragged around the world by these monsters, she had worn this coat like a suit of armor. She had slept in it. She had sweated in it. She had preserved the scent of her father and his dog, sealing it into the fibers. To Titan, Mike and Rex weren't dead. Their ghosts were standing right there inside that circle. The scent was stale, but it was undeniable. It was the smell of the pack leader. Titan wasn't protecting a stranger. He was protecting the alpha's pup. He was guarding the legacy. The realization washed over Jack with such intensity that he almost forgot where he was. It explained everything. The formation, the refusal to attack, the way they looked at her. They looked at her with reverence because she carried the scent of the king. Jack stood up. The movement was slow, fluid, and terrifyingly calm. The confusion was gone. The hesitation was gone. The fear of losing his pension was gone. He turned to Captain Vargas. Vargas was staring at the patch, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open. He knew Mike, too. Everyone knew Mike. "That is Mike Donovan's jacket," Vargas whispered. "Yes," Jack said, his voice cold as ice, "and that is Mike Donovan's daughter." Jack turned to face Marcus Winston. The man in the cashmere coat was no longer smirking. He was pale. He saw the shift in the room. He saw the way the police officers were looking at him now. The guns that had been pointed at the dogs were slowly shifting. Barrels were lowering. Safeties were clicking off. This man had not just kidnapped a child. He had kidnapped the daughter of a hero. He had stolen the child of a brother officer. "You didn't know, did you?" Jack said, walking toward Marcus. Marcus took a step back, dragging Sophie with him. "I don't know what you are talking about. This is insane. I am Marcus Winston. I have papers." "Papers?" Jack spat. "You have a dead man's coat wrapped around a child you stole. You thought you were clever. You thought you could dress her up, give her a new name, and walk her past security. You thought the humans were too stupid to notice." Jack pointed at Titan. "But you forgot about the dogs. You didn't know that coat smelled like the only thing these dogs respect more than a bullet. You walked the daughter of the alpha right through the middle of his pack." Marcus pulled the detonator from his pocket. The black plastic device looked small and harmless in his manicured hand, but Jack knew what it was. "Back off!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "I will press it. I swear to God I will press it." The crowd gasped and surged backward. Jack stopped. He was 10 feet away. "That isn't a bomb." Jack said, his eyes locked on Marcus's thumb hovering over the red button. Marcus laughed a frantic, high-pitched sound. It is a release trigger. The briefcase. He nodded to the leather bag Elena was clutching. It's an aerosol canister. Chimera virus. Military grade. If I let go of this button, the seal breaks. The ventilation system will pull it through the whole airport in 90 seconds. Everyone here dies. You die. The girl dies. The dogs die. Jack looked at the briefcase. He saw the red seal on the lock. Biohazard. Marcus wasn't just a kidnapper. He was a broker. He was selling a weapon and he was using Sophie as his cover. A family traveling for the holidays was the perfect camouflage for a transaction that could wipe out a city. And Sophie wasn't just a disguise. She was the insurance. He knew who she was, Jack realized. He targeted her. Why Sophie, Jack asked, keeping his voice level, trying to buy time. Why Mike's daughter? Marcus sneered, regaining some of his composure. Because Mike Donovan confiscated $20 million in crypto keys from my employer before he died. The keys are voice encoded. He jerked Sophie's arm. She knows the phrase. Her father taught it to her. A nursery rhyme. Once we get to Zurich, she is going to sing it for us. And then, well, then we won't need the coat anymore. Jack felt a rage so pure it almost blinded him. They were going to kill her. Once they had the money, they were going to discard her like trash. Titan growled. It was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. The dog sensed Jack's rage. He mirrored it. Jack looked at Titan. He looked at the other dogs. 7 German shepherds and 1 golden retriever. They were statues of lethal potential. Their muscles were coiled. Their eyes were fixed on the hand holding the detonator. They knew. They didn't understand the words chimera virus or crypto keys, but they understood the threat. They understood that the man holding the Alpha's pup was the enemy, and they understood that the scent on the coat was a command from the grave. Protect her. Jack looked at Sophie. She was looking at him. Her blue eyes, Mike's eyes, were clear. She wasn't crying anymore. She had heard what Marcus said. She knew why she was there, and she knew what she had to do. She moved her hand on Titan's head one last time. She didn't make the fist. She didn't make the palm. She tapped her index finger twice on the bridge of the dog's nose. Tap, tap. Jack's breath caught. That wasn't a stay command. That wasn't a hold command. That was the signal for watch. Focus. Lock on. Prepare to strike. And then she pointed. She didn't point at Marcus. She didn't point at his face. She pointed a tiny shaking finger directly at the hand holding the remote detonator. Jack smiled. A cold, hard smile. Mike Donovan had taught his daughter well. She had identified the primary threat. She had marked the target. Jack looked at Marcus. You should have picked a different flight, Jack said softly. Titan shifted his weight. His back legs bunched, and then the world exploded into motion. The silence that followed Jack's declaration was heavier than the blizzard burying the world outside. The name Mike Donovan hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. To the passengers watching from behind the security tape, it was just a name, but to every police officer in that terminal, it was a ghost story. Mike Donovan was a legend, a hero who had given his life to stop a trafficking ring, and now his daughter, who had been mourned and buried in the hearts of the department, was standing right there, shivering in a coat that smelled of her father's sacrifice. Jack stood up slowly. His knees cracked, but he did not feel the pain. He felt only a cold, crystallizing rage. The chemical scanner lay forgotten on the floor. The fear of losing his pension or his reputation had evaporated completely. In its place was the singular, focused clarity of a man who has finally found the target. He looked at Marcus Winston. He looked at the man's perfectly coiffed silver hair, his manicured fingernails, his arrogant posture, and he saw through it all. He saw the monster beneath the cashmere. This isn't Sophie Winston. Jack repeated, his voice rising not in volume, but in intensity, carrying to the back of the silent concourse. This is Sophie Donovan. You didn't adopt her. You stole her. You snatched the daughter of a fallen police sergeant, and you dressed her up like a doll to hide your crimes. Captain Vargas lowered his weapon, slightly confusion, warring with shock on his face. Sterling, are you sure? Mike's daughter is dead. We searched for months. She is standing right in front of you, Jack said, never taking his eyes off Marcus. Look at the dogs, Vargas. Look at them. They aren't attacking her. They are mourning with her. They smell Mike on that coat. They smell the Alpha. That is why they broke formation. That is why they defied orders. They recognized a member of the pack that we left behind. The truth hit the room like a physical wave. The other canine handlers who had been struggling to control their dogs suddenly stopped pulling on the leashes. They looked at the little girl. They looked at the patch Jack had exposed. And one by one they understood. The aggression drained out of the police line, replaced by a collective horror. Marcus Winston saw the shift. He saw the moment the tide turned against him. He saw the realization in the eyes of the SWAT team. He saw the safety catches being thumbed off on 20 rifles. The charade was over. The role of the aggrieved, wealthy father could no longer protect him. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He didn't try to beg for mercy. Instead, a transformation occurred that was terrifying to witness. The mask of humanity simply slid off his face. His posture changed. The feigned concern vanished. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a flat reptilian stillness. He smiled. It was a small, tight smile that held no humor, only a cruel calculation. "Very clever," Marcus said, his voice changing, completely dropping the affectation of the grieving parent and becoming hard and flat. "I was told the dogs were just tools. I was told they were biological machines. I didn't account for sentimentality. That was an oversight." He stepped back, dragging Sophie with him. The little girl stumbled, her canvas sneakers squeaking on the floor, but she didn't cry out. She knew what this man was. She had known for 6 months. "Let her go," Jack ordered, stepping over the line of the perimeter. Marcus sighed as if he were bored. He reached into the deep pocket of his wool coat. The movement was casual, almost lazy. "Don't do it," Jack warned, raising his empty hands. Marcus pulled his hand out. He wasn't holding a weapon. He wasn't holding a phone. He was holding a device that looked like a garage door opener, but much simpler. It was a black rectangular block of plastic with a single heavy-duty industrial spring-loaded red button on the top. A thin wire ran from the base of the device, disappearing up his sleeve and snaking down his body. His thumb was resting heavily on the button, pressing it down flush with the casing. "Do you know what a dead man's switch is, Officer Sterling?" Marcus asked, his tone conversational. Jack froze. Every cop knew what a dead man's switch was. It was the ultimate stalemate. It was a trigger that activated not when you pressed it, but when you let go. As long as Marcus held that button down, nothing happened. But if he was shot, if he was tackled, if his hand relaxed for even a fraction of a second, the circuit would break and the signal would fire. "Back off," Marcus said. He didn't shout it. He whispered it, and the whisper was more terrifying than a scream. "Everyone back off. 50 feet. Right now, or my thumb gets tired." Captain Vargas signaled frantically to his team. "Fall back. Fall back. Do not fire. Nobody fire." The circle of police widened, moving away like a tide retreating from the shore. The passengers scrambled over seats, fighting to get further away from the man with the button. Jack stood his ground. He was 10 feet away. Titan was 5 feet away, sitting like a stone gargoyle, his eyes fixed on the device in Marcus's hand. "It isn't a bomb," Jack said, studying the wire. "You couldn't get a bomb that size past the thermal scanners. Not enough explosive mass to bring down the terminal." Marcus chuckled. "You are thinking too small. Explosives are crude. They are messy. They are for amateurs who want to make a loud noise. I am a businessman, Officer Sterling. I deal in solutions." He nodded his head toward Elena, the woman who had been playing the role of the distraught mother. She was standing frozen, clutching the designer leather briefcase to her chest with white knuckles. She wasn't crying anymore either. She looked terrified, but it wasn't fear for her child. It was fear of what she was holding. "Show him," Marcus commanded. Elena hesitated. "Show him," Marcus barked, his thumb twitching on the button. With trembling hands, Elena set the briefcase on the floor. She undid the gold latches. The click echoed in the silence. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in custom-cut black foam, was a single silver cylinder. It looked like a thermos, but it was stamped with symbols that made Jack's blood run cold. Biohazard. Level 4. There was a digital display on the top of the cylinder connected to a receiver unit. A small red light on the receiver was blinking in sync with the device in Marcus's hand. "It is called Chimera," Marcus said. "It is a weaponized strain of hemorrhagic fever engineered to be airborne. It doesn't need an explosion. It just needs to be released." Jack stared at the cylinder. The concept of it was too big to process. An invisible death. "If I let go of this button," Marcus continued, "the solenoid on that canister releases. The pressure seal breaks. The airport ventilation system does the rest. Within 90 seconds, this entire terminal is contaminated. Within an hour, 50,000 people are infected. By Christmas morning, well, let's just say Chicago will be a ghost town. Why? Jack asked, his voice thick with horror. Why do this? Marcus shrugged. It's a delivery. My client pays for secure transport. The airport security focuses on metal. They focus on gunpowder. They focus on liquids over 3 ounces. They don't look closely at a grieving family rushing to a private jet. They don't strip search a 6-year-old girl. Sophie was my passport. She was the perfect camouflage. Who stops to question a rich family with a shy daughter? He looked down at Sophie with a look of pure contempt. She was useful, Marcus said. She kept quiet. She did what she was told, until you and your mutt decided to play hero. Sophie looked up at Jack. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. She understood. She knew what was in the case. She had been living with this terror for months, sleeping next to a canister that could end the world, and that is why she had signaled the dog. She wasn't just trying to save herself, she was trying to save everyone. She knew that if they got on that plane, if they took that virus to wherever they were going, the nightmare would never end. She had risked her life. She had risked Marcus pushing that button just to give Jack a chance to stop them. You are a monster, Jack whispered. I am a professional, Marcus corrected, and I am leaving. He took a step backward toward the emergency exit doors that led out to the tarmac. The wind howled outside, battering the glass. I am walking out that door, Marcus said. My wife is coming with me. The girl is coming with me. We are getting on our plane. And if anyone follows us, if I see a single blue uniform, if I see one of these dogs move an inch, I let go. He tightened his grip on Sophie's arm. And if I let go, officer, you won't just watch this girl die. You will watch everyone you swore to protect bleed out from their eyes. Do you understand? Jack looked at Vargas. The captain was pale, talking frantically into his radio, probably calling the CDC, probably calling the federal government, but help was too far away. The virus was right here. I understand, Jack said. Good, Marcus sneered. He began to back away, dragging Sophie. The little girl's feet dragged on the floor. She looked at Titan. The dog hadn't moved. He was vibrating with a low-frequency growl that sounded like a generator humming. His eyes were locked on Marcus's hand. Titan knew. He didn't know what a virus was. He didn't know what a dead man's switch was, but he knew threat mechanics. He knew that the hand holding the black box was the source of the danger. He knew that the man was threatening the pack, and he was waiting. Jack looked at the dog. A silent communication passed between them. A look that said, "Not yet. Wait for the mistake." Marcus reached the door. He kicked the crash bar. The door swung open and the blizzard roared into the terminal, swirling snow and ice across the floor. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a second. Marcus stepped out into the storm, dragging Sophie into the whiteout. Elena grabbed the briefcase and followed him. "Stay!" Marcus screamed back at the police, holding the switch high. "Stay, or they all die!" The door began to close. Jack looked at Titan. He looked at the other 7 dogs, who were all standing now, ears forward, muscles coiled. The threat was moving. The threat was leaving containment. If Marcus got on a plane with that virus, he could drop it anywhere. He could hold the world hostage. Jack made a choice. It was the kind of choice that gets people killed or gets them statues. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He looked at Titan and he whispered one word. Hunt. Titan didn't bark. He launched. He hit the closing door with his shoulder bursting through into the snow. And behind him 7 other shadows followed, disappearing into the storm to finish what the law could not. The blizzard outside hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Terminal 4, creating a wall of white noise that seemed to isolate the standoff from the rest of the world. Inside, the air was stagnant, heavy with the metallic taste of adrenaline and the sour scent of terror. Marcus Winston stood with his back to the emergency exit doors, the swirling snow visible through the glass behind him like a portal to another dimension. He held the dead man's switch in his left hand, his thumb turning white from the pressure he was exerting on the red button. But that was not enough. To control a crowd, you need fear of the unknown, but to control a hostage, you need fear of the immediate. With a movement so smooth it was almost elegant, Marcus reached into the inner breast pocket of his cashmere coat. When his hand emerged, it was holding something that looked like a shard of bone. It was a knife, but not a knife that would trigger a metal detector. It was white ceramic, perfectly balanced, honed to a molecular edge that was sharper than steel. It was a ghost weapon for a ghost operative. He lowered the blade. He pressed the white edge against the soft skin of Sophie's throat, right over the pulse that was fluttering like a trapped moth. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. The SWAT team members who had been shifting their weight looking for a clean shot froze instantly. There was no clean shot. Not anymore. Marcus had pulled Sophie's small body tight against his own, using her as a human vest. Her head was tipped back, forced by the pressure of the blade. One slip, one sudden noise, one muscle spasm, and her throat would be open. Back, Marcus whispered. The word hissed through the silence like escaping steam. He didn't scream it. He didn't have to. The threat was absolute. I want a plane, Marcus said, his voice calm, detached, professional. I want a Gulfstream G650 fueled and waiting on the North Tarmac in 10 minutes. I want the pilot to be one of your people. I don't care who, just someone who can fly and keep his mouth shut. No radio contact, no flight plan. We take off and we disappear. Captain Vargas took a step forward, his hands raised, palms out in a universal gesture of surrender. We can't get a jet in 10 minutes, Marcus. The weather is grounded. The tower has closed the airspace. Then open it, Marcus replied, or I open this. He nodded toward the leather briefcase at Elena's feet. The biohazard seal on the lock seemed to glow under the harsh terminal lights. You think I'm bluffing? Marcus asked, scanning the faces of the terrified officers. You think a man who smuggles weapons-grade pathogens cares about a snowstorm? This canister contains the Chimera strain. It was designed to liquefy internal organs in 4 hours. It is airborne. It is highly contagious. And it has a mortality rate of 100%. He pressed the ceramic blade harder against Sophie's skin. A tiny bead of blood, bright red and shocking, appeared on her neck. If I release the button, the solenoid pops. The gas vents. The ventilation system of this airport pushes it into every terminal, every food court, every bathroom within 90 seconds. 50,000 people. Men, women, children. They will all be bleeding out of their eyes before the sun comes up. Is that what you want, Captain? Do you want to be the man who let Chicago die because he couldn't find a plane? Vargas looked sick. He looked at the briefcase, then at the thumb on the button, then at the knife. The math was impossible. 1 plane versus a city. 1 hostage versus 50,000. Clear the runway, Vargas ordered, his voice shaking. Get him a plane. Just get him out of here. The police line began to buckle. Officers lowered their rifles, stepping back slowly, their boots scuffing on the floor. It was a retreat. It was a surrender. They were backing down, leaving Jack Sterling alone at the front of the line. Jack didn't move. He stood 10 feet away, his Glock still leveled at Marcus's head, but he knew he couldn't take the shot. The reflex time of a human thumb is faster than a bullet. If Jack fired, the switch would release before Marcus hit the ground. The virus would deploy. Sophie would die. Jack looked at Sophie. She should have been hysterical. A 6-year-old girl with a knife at her throat, surrounded by screaming adults and armed men, should have been in a state of collapse. But Sophie Donovan was not collapsing. She was standing on her tiptoes, trying to relieve the pressure of the blade on her neck, but her body was not shaking. She was looking at Titan. The big German shepherd was the only other creature in the room who hadn't moved. He was sitting 5 feet away from Marcus. His ears were swiveled forward like radar dishes. His muscles were bunched under his coat, tight as steel cables. He wasn't growling anymore. He had gone past the point of warning. He was in the zone of predation. Sophie stared into the dog's amber eyes. It was a look of profound intensity, a silent conversation passing between 2 soldiers on a battlefield. She wasn't looking at him for comfort. She wasn't looking at him for a goodbye. She was waiting. Jack saw it. He saw the way her eyes flicked from Titan to the hand holding the knife, then back to Titan. She was calculating. She was measuring the distance. She knew that Titan couldn't attack while the knife was there. She knew that any movement would kill her. But she also knew something that Marcus Winston didn't. She knew what Titan was capable of. She knew that her father had trained this dog to move faster than human reaction time. She knew that Titan wasn't just a dog, he was a biological weapon designed to neutralize a threat with surgical precision. Wait. Sophie's eyes seemed to say. Wait for the gap. She stood frozen, a statue of patience amidst the chaos. It was unnatural for a child to be this still. It was the stillness of a predator lying in wait. It was the stillness of Mike Donovan. Jack felt a lump in his throat. He saw his best friend in her face. He saw the training, the discipline, the absolute refusal to be a victim. She wasn't just surviving, she was strategizing. Marcus grinned, seeing the police fall back. He thought he had won. He thought fear had done its work. Good, he said. Very sensible. Now we are going to walk out those doors. We are going to get in the van, and we are going to the plane. If anyone follows us within 100 yards, I release the button. If I see a blue light, I release the button. If one of these dogs twitches, I release the button. He began to shuffle backward toward the emergency exit, dragging Sophie with him. Elena grabbed the heavy briefcase, struggling with its weight, moving to flank him. Sophie's sneakers squeaked on the floor as she was pulled back. She didn't fight. She kept her eyes locked on Titan. Titan's head lowered a fraction of an inch. His back legs shifted, digging his claws into the carpet, finding traction. He wasn't looking at the knife. He was looking at the thumb on the switch. Marcus reached the crash bar of the exit door. He hit it with his hip. The door flew open and the storm roared in. The wind was a physical force, a freezing blast that carried snow and ice into the terminal, blinding the officers and sending a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the temperature. The sudden violence of the weather was shocking. Move! Marcus screamed over the wind, shoving Elena out into the whiteout. He dragged Sophie to the threshold. The snow swirled around her dirty coat, whipping her hair across her face. Sophie looked back one last time. She looked at Jack. She looked at Titan. And then she did something that made Jack's heart stop. She didn't signal with her hand. She couldn't. Her arms were pinned. She blinked. 3 times. Rapid, hard, blink, blink, blink. It was the signal for go. It was the signal Mike used to use when he was ready to breach a door. She was telling them to come for her. She was telling them that she wasn't afraid of the snow. She was telling them that the hunt was on. Marcus pulled her into the blizzard. The heavy metal door began to swing shut on its hydraulic arms, slowly sealing the terminal off from the storm. Jack didn't shout. He didn't look at Captain Vargas. He didn't ask for permission. He looked at Titan. The dog was already moving. He wasn't running. He was flowing. He launched himself from a standstill, a blur of copper and black. He didn't aim for the door handle. He aimed for the gap. Titan hit the closing door with his shoulder, smashing it open with the force of a battering ram. He disappeared into the white void of the tarmac. Brutus followed, then Luna, then Duke. One by one, the 8 dogs launched themselves into the storm. They didn't bark. They didn't howl. They went silent. They went dark. Jack holstered his weapon and sprinted. He ran past the stunned SWAT team. He ran past the weeping passengers. He ran past the line of authority and safety and procedure. He hit the cold air like a wall. The wind tore at his uniform. The snow blinded him, but he didn't need to see. He could hear them. Out in the darkness on the frozen wasteland of the runway, the pack was hunting. And they weren't hunting for an arrest. They were hunting for blood. Jack ran into the night, whispering a prayer to a dead man. Keep her head down, Mike. Keep her head down. We are coming. The heavy steel door slammed shut with a finality that echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence of the terminal. The blizzard was now a physical barrier, a wall of white noise and freezing wind that separated the warm, sterile safety of the airport from the chaotic, frozen wasteland of the tarmac. Inside the glass, the world was still watching. Captain Vargas was screaming into his radio, coordinating a perimeter that was already useless. The SWAT team was lowering their rifles, their expressions a mixture of relief and frustration. The threat had left the building, but the hostage was gone. Jack Sterling stood at the window. He pressed his hand against the cold glass. Through the swirling vortex of snow, he could see 3 dark shapes moving away. They were indistinct, blurred ghosts, struggling against the gale force winds. Marcus Winston was dragging Sophie. Elena was stumbling behind them, clutching the lethal briefcase to her chest like a shield. They were heading toward the service road, toward the private hangars where the elite jets parked. They were disappearing into the whiteout, and once they vanished into that storm, they would be gone forever. Vargas grabbed Jack's shoulder, spinning him around. His face was red vein bulging in his neck. You let them go, Sterling. You let a domestic terrorist walk out onto an active runway with a biological weapon. Do you have any idea what you have done? We can't shoot out there. The visibility is zero. If we miss and hit the canister..." Jack brushed Vargas's hand off his shoulder. The movement was slow, almost dismissive. He didn't look at his commanding officer. He didn't look at the terrified passengers. He looked down at Titan. The old German shepherd was vibrating. It wasn't the trembling of fear or cold. It was the frequency of a coiled spring about to snap. Titan was staring at the door. His nose was working furiously, pulling the scent of the girl out of the crack beneath the threshold. He whined a high-pitched sound of pure agony. It was the sound of a partner who knows his other half is in danger. Jack knelt down. The world narrowed to just him and the dog. He put his hands on either side of Titan's face. He felt the rough fur, the strong jaw, the heat radiating from the animal's body. He looked into those amber eyes and he saw the question burning there. Why are we waiting? Jack unclipped the heavy leather leash from Titan's tactical vest. The brass snap made a small metallic click that sounded louder than the sirens. Titan didn't move. He waited for the word. He waited for the permission to be what he was born to be. Not a pet, not a tool, a predator. Jack leaned in close, his lips brushing the dog's ear. "Hunt them down," Jack whispered. It wasn't a shout. It was a prayer. It was an authorization of violence. Titan didn't bark. He didn't look back. He launched himself. He hit the crash bar of the emergency door with his full 90 pounds of muscle. The door flew open, catching the wind and banging against the exterior wall. Titan disappeared into the snow, a copper streak swallowed by the white void. Jack stood up. He turned to the other handlers. There were 7 of them. 7 officers holding 7 leashes attached to the most dangerous dogs in the state of Illinois. There was Officer Miller with Brutus, the massive Rottweiler who had once taken down a fleeing felon by crushing his femur. There was Sergeant Davis with Luna the Golden Retriever who could find a single drop of accelerant in a burned-down warehouse. There was Duke, Ranger, Ace, Shadow, Gunner. They were looking at Jack. They had heard the whisper. They had seen the door open. They looked at their dogs. The animals were frantic, straining against their collars, whining, scratching at the floor, their eyes fixed on the open door where the alpha had gone. They smelled the girl, too. They smelled the fear, and they smelled the hunt. "You heard him?" Miller said, his voice grim. He reached down and unsnapped the leash. "Go get her, Brutus." Brutus roared a deep, chesty bark that shook the windows and sprinted for the door. One by one, the clicks echoed down the line. Snap, snap, snap. It was a mutiny. It was a violation of every protocol in the handbook. It was the end of 7 careers, and it was the bravest thing Jack had ever seen. 7 dogs launched themselves after Titan. They moved like a river of fur and teeth flowing through the open door and into the storm. They didn't need to see. They didn't need orders. They were a pack now. They had a scent, and they had a target. Jack looked at Vargas. The captain was staring at the empty leashes lying on the floor, his mouth hanging open. He looked at Jack with a mixture of awe and awe. "Vargas," Vargas whispered. Jack didn't answer. He turned and ran toward the door. He plunged into the cold, following the path the dogs had cut through the snow. Outside, the world was a nightmare. The wind hit Jack like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. The temperature was 20 below zero with the wind chill. The snow wasn't falling, it was driving sideways, stinging his face like needles. He couldn't see 5 feet in front of him. The airport lights were just hazy orange halos in the distance, but he could hear them. Ahead of him in the darkness, the sound of the pack was rising. It wasn't the chaotic barking of a dog park. It was the coordinated silence of the hunt, broken only by the occasional sharp yip of communication. Jack ran. His boots slipped on the icy tarmac. He drew his weapon, holding it close to his chest to keep the mechanism from freezing. He followed the paw prints in the snow. Up ahead, Marcus Winston was struggling. The snow was deep drifting against the service vehicles and baggage carts. His expensive Italian loafers were useless on the ice. He slipped, falling to one knee, dragging Sophie down with him. "Get up!" Marcus screamed, pulling her up by the collar of her coat. Sophie stumbled, her canvas sneakers numb, her legs blue with cold. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. The wind whipped her hair into her eyes, blinding her. She was crying, but the tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. Elena was lagging behind the heavy briefcase, weighing her down. "I can't. Marcus, she wailed, her voice thin in the wind. It is too heavy. Leave it, Marcus shouted. No, wait, bring it. We need the leverage. He looked back. He couldn't see the terminal anymore. He couldn't see the police. The whiteout had swallowed them. He felt a surge of triumph. They had made it. The jet was just a few hundred yards away. He could see the faint strobe of its navigation lights pulsing in the gloom, and then he heard it. It wasn't a siren. It wasn't a shout. It was the sound of something heavy hitting the snow, rhythmically, fast, getting closer. Puff, 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 puff. Marcus stopped. He squinted into the white void behind him. What is that? Elena asked, breathless. Then the first shadow emerged from the storm. It was low to the ground. It was fast. It was black and tan and terrifying. Titan burst through a snowdrift, his ears pinned back, his eyes glowing with the reflection of the distant runway lights. He wasn't panting. His mouth was closed, his breathing regulated for endurance. He saw Marcus. Marcus gasped, fumbling for the detonator in his pocket. He had put it away to help him walk. His fingers were numb, clumsy with the cold. Stay back, he screamed, pulling the black box out. But Titan didn't stop, and he wasn't alone. To the left, a black shape materialized. Brutus. To the right, a golden blur. Luna. Behind them, 5 more shadows fanned out, cutting off the escape route, flanking the targets, moving with a military precision that was impossible for animals to know, and yet they knew it. They formed a semicircle, a hunting crescent. They cut Marcus off from the jet. They cut him off from the service road. They pushed him back toward the open exposed tarmac. Sophie saw them. Through her frozen eyelashes, she saw the cavalry arrive. She saw Titan, the old dog with the bad hip, leading the charge, plowing through snow that was up to his chest. Marcus held the detonator up his thumb, hovering over the button. I will do it, he screamed into the wind. I will kill us all. But the wind snatched his words away. The dogs didn't care about his threats. They didn't care about the button. They only cared about the girl in the dirty coat who was shivering in the snow. Titan halted 10 feet away. He lowered his head. He let out a bark that sounded like a gunshot, and then the pack attacked. The wind on the tarmac was a physical force, a screaming white wall that erased the world. Marcus Winston stood in the center of the swirling void, his expensive leather boots slipping on the slick concrete. He held the dead man's switch high in the air, his thumb clamped down on the red button with a force that turned his knuckle white. He was trembling, but it was not just from the cold. It was the adrenaline of a man who realizes he has stepped into a cage with something he does not understand. He expected the dogs to charge. He had seen police dogs on television. He expected them to come in a straight line, barking and snarling, leaping for his padded arm, giving him the chance to pivot and use the girl as a shield. He expected a chaotic brawl where he could use the detonator as the ultimate trump card, but the dogs did not charge. They did not bark. They disappeared. One moment there were 8 dark shapes standing at the edge of the terminal light. The next moment they dissolved into the blizzard. The whiteout swallowed them whole. Marcus spun around, dragging Sophie with him, his eyes darting frantically through the snow. He couldn't see them. He could only hear the wind and the distant whine of the jet engines waiting for him. Where are they? Marcus screamed, his voice snatched away by the gale. He backed up, pulling Sophie toward the faint strobe light of a baggage cart parked near the service road. Elena was stumbling behind him, clutching the biological weapon to her chest, slipping on the ice, sobbing with a mixture of cold and terror. Keep moving, Marcus yelled at her. Don't stop. They can't touch us as long as I hold this button. But Marcus was wrong. He was thinking like a human. He was thinking in lines and angles. The creatures hunting him were not thinking like police officers. They were thinking like wolves. They had reverted to a programming that was thousands of years older than the airport, older than the city, older than the concept of laws. They were a pack, and a pack does not fight fair. A pack divides and conquers. Out in the darkness, Titan had issued a silent command. It wasn't a bark. It was a shift in body language, a frequency of movement that the other dogs understood instantly. 2 dogs, Duke and Ranger, broke away from the main group. They didn't run toward Marcus. They ran in a wide arc, looping far out onto the runway, skirting the edge of the darkness. They were the blockers. Their target wasn't the man, it was the escape route. They sprinted through the deep snow, their paws churning like pistons, heading straight for the landing gear of the private jet. that was idling 300 yards away. They positioned themselves at the bottom of the air stairs, growling at the confused pilot who was peering out of the cockpit. There would be no takeoff tonight. The path was closed. The second Group 4 dogs, led by Brutus the massive Rottweiler, moved in on the flank. They emerged from the snow on the left side, not attacking, but harassing. They targeted the weak link. Elena screamed as a black shape snapped at her ankles. She spun around, losing her footing. Another dog ace lunged from the shadows, nipping at the hem of her coat. They weren't trying to kill her. They were hurting her. They were cutting her off from Marcus. "Get away!" Elena shrieked, swinging the heavy briefcase. The dogs danced out of range, barking sharp, rhythmic bursts that disoriented her. She fell to her knees in the snow, the briefcase slipping from her numb fingers. It slid away across the ice. Brutus stood over it, his teeth bared, daring her to reach for it. The weapon was neutralized. Marcus was alone. He stood in the open, holding Sophie by the collar of her coat, his other hand holding the switch aloft. He spun in a circle, trying to track the threats, but they were everywhere and nowhere. "Show yourselves!" he screamed. And then he saw him. Titan. The old German shepherd emerged from beneath the chassis of a parked luggage loader. He was 30 feet away. He wasn't running. He was walking. A slow, deliberate stalk. His head was low, his shoulders rolling with a predatory grace. His amber eyes were locked on Marcus's throat, and behind Marcus a shadow moved. It was Shadow, a black Labrador with eyes like obsidian, the beta of the pack. He had circled all the way around, using the wind to mask his scent, coming up directly behind the man. They had him boxed in, the triangle of death. Marcus realized with a jolt of horror that he had been outmaneuvered. These weren't animals reacting to a stimulus. They were soldiers executing a raid. "Stay back!" Marcus roared, thrusting the detonator forward. "I will drop it. I swear I will drop it." Titan stopped. He sat down in the snow. He tilted his head. He looked at the black plastic box in Marcus's hand. He knew that box was the source of the power. He knew that as long as the man held it, the pack could not strike. Sophie felt the change in Marcus. She felt the tremor in his hand. She felt the way his grip on her coat loosened just a fraction as he focused all his fear on the giant Dakpluk sitting in front of him. She looked at Titan. The dog flicked his ears. A microscopic signal. Now. Sophie Donovan was 6 years old. She was cold. She was terrified. She had been stolen from her life and dragged through a nightmare, but she was her father's daughter, and she knew that in a hostage situation, you do not wait for someone to save you. You wait for the gap, and you make it wider. She looked at the hand gripping her shoulder, the expensive leather glove, the wrist exposed between the glove and the cuff of the cashmere coat. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She opened her mouth and she bit down. She bit with every ounce of strength in her small jaw. She bit until her teeth met through the fabric and sank into the flesh and tendon of Marcus Winston's wrist. Marcus screamed. It was a high, thin sound of shock and pain. His reflex was involuntary. He jerked his arm back, trying to shake her off. His body twisted. His balance shifted on the ice. And for one fatal second, his attention broke. His thumb, which had been pressing the red button with the weight of his life, slipped. The button didn't release completely. It just clicked up a millimeter. But that millimeter was the signal Titan had been waiting for. Titan didn't run. He exploded. He didn't aim for Marcus's legs. He didn't aim for the arm. He knew that the thick wool coat would absorb a bite. He knew that a bite would result in a struggle, and a struggle would mean the button would be pressed. Titan needed to end it in one hit. He sprinted 3 strides, gathering momentum, his claws tearing into the tarmac. Ahead of him was the luggage loader, a flatbed vehicle with a conveyor belt ramp aimed at the sky. Titan didn't go around it. He ran up the ramp. He hit the top of the ramp 6 feet in the air, and he launched. It was a jump that defied physics. It was a jump born of 9 years of training and a lifetime of loyalty. A 90-pound dog flying through the blizzard like a copper thunderbolt. Marcus looked up. He saw the shadow blotting out the airport lights. He saw the teeth. He saw the eyes of judgment. He didn't even have time to blink. Titan hit him. He didn't bite. He turned his shoulder at the last second and slammed into Marcus's chest with the force of a wrecking ball. The impact was sickening. It sounded like a wet sandbag hitting a brick wall. The air was driven from Marcus's lungs in an explosive grunt. His ribs cracked. He was lifted off his feet, thrown backward through the air as if he had been hit by a car. Marcus landed hard on his back, sliding 10 feet across the ice. Sophie was knocked sideways, tumbling into a snowbank safe. But the detonator, the black plastic device, flew from Marcus's hand. It spun through the air, arching high in the wind. Time seemed to slow down. Jack Sterling, who had just burst through the whiteout, saw the device spinning. He saw the red button extended. He saw the deadly arc. If it hit the ground, the impact would shatter the casing or jar the circuit. The signal would send. The virus would vent. No, Jack screamed, diving forward, his hand outstretched, knowing he would never reach it in time. The detonator fell. It was going to hit the pavement, but it never touched the ground. A black blur shot out from the shadows. Shadow, the beta, the dog who had been waiting behind Marcus. Shadow didn't try to catch it with his paws. He opened his jaws. He snatched the device out of the air inches before it hit the concrete. A soft clack of teeth. He had it, but Shadow didn't drop it. He didn't bring it to Jack. He didn't spit it out. Shadow sensed the vibration in the device. He heard the faint electronic whine of the capacitor charging. He knew this object was death. He knew it was the thing that threatened the pack. And his instinct told him there was only one way to protect the Alpha's daughter. Get it away. Shadow clamped his jaws shut gently, holding the trigger mechanism but not crushing it. He landed on his paws, skidding on the ice, and he didn't stop. He turned away from Jack. He turned away from Titan. He turned away from the terminal filled with people. He ran toward the darkness. Shadow, stop! Jack screamed, his voice tearing his throat. Drop it, Shadow! Drop it! But Shadow ignored the command. He ran with a desperate, frantic speed. He ran toward the far end of the runway, toward the empty fields where the snow was deep and the world was empty. He was taking the grenade. He was taking the virus away from the pack. Shadow ran until his black coat was swallowed by the white storm. He ran until he was just a memory in the blizzard. Jack fell to his knees in the snow. He watched the darkness, waiting for the flash, waiting for the sound, waiting for the end. Titan scrambled off of Marcus, who was groaning and gasping for air, his chest crushed. Titan didn't attack the man again. He ran to Sophie. He stood over her, licking the snow from her face, whining, checking her for injuries, but Jack's eyes were fixed on the distance. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, silence. No explosion, no hiss of gas, no siren, just the wind. Shadow hadn't dropped it. He hadn't bitten down. He was still running, carrying the end of the world in his mouth, running until his heart burst or the fuel ran out. Jack lowered his head and wept. He wept for the bravery of a beast that had no concept of medals or glory, only the pure, unadulterated drive to save the ones he loved. Behind him, the SWAT team finally arrived, boots pounding on the tarmac. They swarmed Marcus, pinning him to the ice. They surrounded Elena. They secured the briefcase. But Jack didn't move. He waited. And then from the darkness, a shape appeared. It was limping. It was covered in snow. It was walking slowly, head down, tail low. Shadow. He walked up to Jack. He stopped. He opened his mouth. He dropped the detonator into Jack's hand. The red light on the device was dead. The battery had dislodged on impact when Shadow caught it. Or maybe the cold had killed it. Or maybe it was just a miracle. Shadow licked Jack's hand. He let out a long, tired sigh and leaned his heavy body against Jack's chest. Jack wrapped his arms around the dog, burying his face in the wet fur. He sobbed uncontrollably, the relief shattering him. "Good boy," Jack whispered. "Good boy," Titan barked. A sharp, joyful sound. He nudged his sight until she stood up. The little girl walked over, her legs shaky. She knelt down in the snow beside Jack and Shadow. She reached out and touched Shadow's head. "Thank you," she whispered. The pack gathered around them. 8 dogs, 1 man, 1 little girl, a circle of warmth in the middle of the freezing night. They had won, not because of scanners, not because of guns, not because of protocol. They had won because when the world fell apart, the dogs held the line. The flashing blue and red lights of the arrival vehicles cut through the blizzard, painting the snow in a chaotic strobe of violence and justice. The SWAT team moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a glacier. They did not shout anymore. They did not hesitate. They swarmed over the figure of Marcus Winston, pinning him into the ice with a force that spoke of their collective rage. The man who had threatened a city, who had held a knife to a child, was now just a body on the ground. His expensive coat ruined his face, pressed into the freezing slush, his wrists locked in steel. Elena was secured 10 feet away. She was not fighting. She had collapsed into a heap of fur and sobbing terror, her hands raised in surrender. She screamed that she was forced to do it, that she didn't know, but the officers ignored her, dragging her toward the waiting cruisers. The time for lies was over. Jack Sterling watched it all from a distance, his chest heaving, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He saw the hazmat unit arrive, two figures in yellow protective suits moving like astronauts across the tarmac. They approached the leather briefcase that lay abandoned in the snow. With agonizing slowness, they placed it into a sealed containment drum. The sound of the lid locking down, the heavy metallic clank of the seal engaging, was the sweetest sound Jack had ever heard. The Chimera virus was caged. The city was safe. But Jack's eyes did not linger on the criminals or the weapon. He turned his gaze to the real cost of the night. Titan was lying in the snow. The adrenaline that had fueled the old German Shepherd's impossible leap had burned out, leaving behind only the reality of age and injury. He was on his side, his flank heaving with rapid, shallow breaths, his tongue lolled out onto the ice. The jump from the luggage loader had been a feat of athleticism that a dog half his age would have hesitated to attempt. For a dog with arthritic hips, it was a sacrifice. Sophie stood a few feet away, surrounded by a paramedic and a female police officer. They were trying to wrap a thermal blanket around her shoulders, trying to guide her toward the warmth of an ambulance. "Come on, sweetheart," the paramedic said, gently reaching for her arm. "You're freezing. Let's get you inside." Sophie flinched away from the touch. She didn't look at the adults. She didn't look at the warm ambulance. She looked at the dog lying in the snow. "No," she whispered. She shrugged off the blanket. She ducked under the paramedic's arm. She didn't run away from the scene. She ran toward the center of it. Sophie dropped to her knees in the slush beside Titan. The wet cold soaked instantly through the knees of her thin pants, but she didn't seem to feel it. She reached out with trembling hands. "Titan," she choked out. The old dog's ear twitched. He opened one eye. He let out a low groan, a sound of pain mixed with recognition. He tried to lift his head, but the effort was too much. He slumped back into the snow. Sophie threw herself forward. She wrapped her small arms around the dog's thick neck, burying her face in his wet fur. She pressed her cheek against the rough hair, smelling the scent of the kennel, the scent of the work, the scent of the only family she had left. And then she broke. For 6 months, Sophie Donovan had been a prisoner. She had been dragged across borders, forced to answer to a new name, forced to pretend that monsters were her parents. She had learned to be silent. She had learned to be invisible because invisibility was survival. She had locked her fear and her grief into a tight box deep inside her chest. But now, holding on to the dog that smelled like her father, the box shattered. She wailed. It wasn't a cry. It was a scream of pure release. She sobbed so hard her entire body shook, rocking back and forth, clinging to the dog. "I missed you," she cried into his fur. "I missed you so much." Titan shifted. He forced his body to move. He ignored the pain in his hips. He slid his front paws forward and dragged his head onto her lap. He let out a long sigh, closing his eyes as she wept over him. He licked the tears from her chin, his tongue rough and warm. Jack walked over slowly, his own vision blurring. He knelt down on the other side of the dog. He put one hand on Titan's ribcage, feeling the steady, strong beat of the heart beneath. He put his other hand on Sophie's back. "He's okay, Sophie," Jack said softly. "He's just tired. He's a tough old soldier, just like your dad." Sophie looked up at him. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes were bright. "He found me," she whispered. "He remembered. He never forgot," Jack said. "None of us did." Captain Vargas approached them, his boots crunching in the snow. He looked different now. The anger and the bureaucracy were gone, replaced by a somber respect. He looked at the girl and the dog, and he took off his cap. "We have the manifesto," Vargas said quietly to Jack. "We found it on Marcus's phone. We know why they took her." Jack stood up, his knees popping in the cold. He looked at the girl, who was still murmuring to the dog. Why, Jack asked, although a part of him already suspected. Why go through all this trouble? Why not just hack the account? Because they couldn't hack it, Vargas said, looking at Sophie with a mix of pity and awe. Mike Donovan was smarter than they gave him credit for. When he raided that cartel server farm 2 years ago, he didn't just seize the assets, he locked them away in a secure cloud vault. But he didn't use a password. He didn't use a fingerprint. Jack nodded, understanding dawning on him. Mike didn't trust technology, he trusted biology. Voice print, Jack said. Vargas nodded. Specifically a voice print combined with a phrase, a nursery rhyme. The encryption key is audio dynamic. It requires a specific tonal frequency to unlock. A child's voice. Jack looked at Sophie. He remembered Mike talking about bedtime stories. He remembered Mike singing to his daughter over the phone when he was working late shifts. Marcus Winston wasn't her father. Jack said, his voice hard. He was her jailer. He needed her alive because she is the key. She is the only person in the world who can open that account. Vargas confirmed. They were taking her to Zurich to a secure banking terminal. They were going to force her to speak the phrase, unlock the funds, and then... Vargas didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Once the vault was open, the key would be discarded. Marcus Winston had planned to kill her. He had kept her alive for 6 months, feeding her, dressing her up, parading her through airports, all while waiting for the moment he could dispose of her like a used wrapper. Jack looked at the little girl. She looked so small next to the massive dog. She wasn't a key. She wasn't an asset. She was a child who had been forced to carry the weight of a fortune in her throat. She saved herself, Jack said. She signaled the dogs. She knew if she got on that plane, she was dead. Vargas nodded. She is a hero, Jack. Just like her father. Jack knelt back down. He touched Sophie's shoulder. Sophie, he said gently, we need to go inside. Titan needs a doctor to look at his leg, and you need to get warm. Sophie hesitated. She looked at Titan. Will he come with me? She asked. Jack smiled. It was the first real smile he had felt in a long time. He isn't going anywhere without you, kid. He is retired now, and I think he just found his new job. Sophie nodded. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She stood up. She didn't let go of Titan's collar. Up, boy, she whispered, using the command tone her father had used. Titan groaned. He gathered his legs under him. He pushed. He rose to his feet, shaking the snow from his coat. He leaned heavily against Sophie's leg, using her for balance, just as she used him for support. They walked toward the ambulance together. A limping dog, a broken girl, and a cop who had finally found the piece of his soul he didn't know was missing. Behind them, the flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the snow, but the real light was walking away from the darkness, one slow, painful step at a time. The nightmare was over. The pack was reunited, and the secrets of the past were finally out in the cold, open air where they could no longer hurt anyone. The automatic doors of the terminal arrivals hall slid open with a soft hiss that sounded like a sigh of relief. The blizzard was still raging outside, a wall of white fury battering against the glass, but inside the air was still and warm. The chaos of the lockdown had lifted, replaced by a hushed reverence that seemed to have infected every person in the building. The passengers who had been angry about delays an hour ago were now standing in silent rows along the security tape. Their phones lowered, their faces solemn. They knew they were witnessing the end of something legendary. Jack Sterling walked slowly, his boots heavy on the polished floor. He was exhausted. Every muscle in his body ached, and the adrenaline crash was leaving him shaking. But he walked tall, because he was walking beside a king. Titan limped at his side. The old German shepherd favored his right hip, the one that had taken the impact of the landing on the tarmac, but his head was high. His coat was wet with melted snow. His ears were pricked forward, and his amber eyes scanned the room with the quiet confidence of a warrior who has won his final war. Behind them, the other 7 dogs followed in a loose formation. They were no longer the aggressive phalanx that had terrified the airport. They were a parade of honor. Brutus Luna Duke and the rest trotted with their heads up their tails, waving slowly in the rhythm of the pack. They had done their job. They had protected the bloodline. At the far end of the hall, the security cordon parted. An older couple rushed through, their faces gray with shock and streaked with tears. It was Robert and Martha Donovan, Mike's parents, Sophie's grandparents. They had been flown in by helicopter the moment the identity was confirmed, landing on the roof just as the takedown on the tarmac was happening. They stopped when they saw her. Sophie was sitting on a plastic chair wrapped in a foil emergency blanket, a paramedic checking her vitals. She looked small and frail, her face smudged with grease and dirt, her hair tangled from the wind. But when she saw the couple, her eyes lit up with a recognition that cut through the trauma. "Grandma," she whispered. Martha Donovan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She ran forward, dropping to her knees and pulling the little girl into an embrace so tight it seemed she was trying to fuse their broken family back together. Robert wrapped his arms around both of them, his shoulders shaking. It was a tableau of grief and joy, a knot of human emotion that made the officers nearby look away to hide their own wet eyes. Jack stopped a few feet away. He signaled Titan to sit. The dog lowered himself gingerly to the cold tile, letting out a long groan of relief as the weight came off his bad leg. Jack rested his hand on the dog's head, feeling the steady heat of his life force. "We got her home, buddy," Jack murmured. "Mission accomplished." Sophie pulled back from her grandmother's embrace. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at her grandparents and smiled a small, tired smile, but then her gaze shifted. She looked past them over their shoulders. She was looking for someone else. She stood up. The foil blanket slid off her shoulders and pooled on the floor like shedding skin. She was still wearing the dirty, oversized gray parka, the coat that smelled of gun oil and old smoke, the coat that had been her prison and her fortress for 6 months. Sophie walked away from her family. She walked toward the dogs. The room went deadly silent. The grandparents started to reach for her, but Jack held up a hand, stopping them. "Let her go," he said softly. "She needs to do this." Sophie walked up to Titan. The massive dog didn't move, but his tail gave a single heavy thump against the floor. He looked at her with a softness that defied his wolfish appearance. He knew her. He knew the scent of her father in her blood. Sophie stood in front of the dog. She reached for the zipper of the parka. Her small fingers struggled for a moment with the cold metal tab, but she didn't ask for help. She pulled it down. The sound of the zipper unmeshing was loud in the quiet hall. She shrugged the coat off her shoulders. She shivered as the cool air of the terminal hit her thin t-shirt, but she didn't seem to notice the cold. She held the coat in her hands. It was heavy, dirty, and ugly. To the rest of the world, it was a piece of evidence or a piece of trash, but to Tubby, it was a mantle. She stepped forward and draped the coat over Titan's shoulders. She arranged it carefully, smoothing the fabric over the wet fur of his back. She pulled the sleeves forward so they hung down like the robes of a king. She made sure the torn lining was visible, the place where Jack had ripped it open to reveal the truth. The yellow patch with the black embroidery was resting right on top of Titan's shoulder blade. Property of Mike and Rex. The coat covered the dog like a superhero's cape. It covered the scars. It covered the age. It connected the past to the present in a physical link of fabric and memory. Sophie leaned down. She pressed her forehead against Titan's wet nose. She closed her eyes. "My daddy was right," she whispered, her voice carrying in the acoustics of the hall clear as a bell. "He told me that dogs have special hearts. He said you can break a dog's bone, but you can't break his promise." She opened her eyes and looked at Titan, then at the other 7 dogs who were watching her with unblinking reverence. "He said you guys never forget." Titan let out a soft whine. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of agreement, a sound of grief shared and burden released. And then without a command, without a signal from any handler, the dogs moved. Titan lowered his front body. He stretched his front paws out and dipped his head low until his chin touched the floor. It was a playbow, usually a sign of joy, but in this context, with the solemnity of the moment, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a bow of fealty. One by one, the other 7 dogs followed suit. Brutus bowed, Luna bowed, Shadow bowed. 8 lethal predators, 8 biological weapons lowered themselves to the ground in front of a 6-year-old girl. They acknowledged her. They acknowledged the blood she carried. They acknowledged the alpha who was gone. Jack Sterling felt a lump in his throat the size of a fist. He felt the sting of tears he couldn't stop. He had spent 20 years in uniform. He had seen the worst of humanity and the best, but he had never seen anything like this. He snapped his heels together. He straightened his spine, ignoring the exhaustion that was pulling him down. He raised his right hand slowly, deliberately, until his fingers touched his brow. He saluted. He didn't salute the captain. He didn't salute the flag. He saluted the girl and the dog. He saluted the partnership that had survived death itself. Around the room, other officers saw him. The SWAT commander saluted. Captain Vargas saluted. The TSA agents saluted. For 10 seconds, the airport stood still in a silent tribute to a loyalty that transcended species and transcended the grave. Sophie stood tall amidst the bowing dogs, her hand resting on the coat that covered Titan. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the daughter of the regiment. Jack lowered his hand. He looked at Titan one last time. The old dog lifted his head. He looked past Sophie, past Jack, past the crowd. He looked up at the ceiling where a black dome security camera was recording the scene. Titan stared into the lens. His eyes were milky with age and exhaustion, but they were filled with a fierce, intelligent pride. It was as if he was looking through the camera, through the wires and the screens, looking for the one person who wasn't there. He was looking for Mike. He was saying, "I did it, boss. I brought her home." The image would be frozen there forever. The girl, the coat, the Boeing pack, and the old warrior looking into the infinite distance. Jack realized then that the mission wasn't just about saving a life. It was about proving a truth that the world often forgot. People leave, people die, people break their promises, but a dog does not. A dog's love is a constant variable in a chaotic universe. It is the one thing that time cannot erode. Liking and sharing a story is easy, but understanding the depth of that bond takes a lifetime. As the screen fades to black, remember this. We breed them for their teeth and their noses. We train them for their aggression and their drive. But the reason they run into the fire for us, the reason they leap from moving vehicles and face down bullets, isn't because of the training. It is because of the heart. Loyalty is the only thing that doesn't fade with time, even when the master is gone. The watch never ends. Good boy, Titan. End of watch. The story of Titan and Sophie teaches us a profound truth about the nature of loyalty that exists beyond human understanding. In a world obsessed with advanced technology, strict protocols, and superficial appearances, we often miss what is truly important. The chemical scanners failed, the security measures failed, and even the trained human eyes failed to see the danger hiding in plain sight. But the dogs did not fail. They reminded us that true connection transcends time logic and even death itself. When Titan recognized the scent of his fallen brother on Sophie's dirty coat, he didn't see a stranger or a threat. He saw family. This story serves as a powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four paws and possess a heart capable of unconditional love. It challenges us to trust our instincts and to look deeper than the surface level of those around us. We learned that the strongest armor isn't made of Kevlar, but of the enduring legacy of love left behind by those we have lost. Titan proved that while people may leave and promises may be broken, a dog's loyalty is a constant variable in a chaotic universe, a watch that never truly ends. If you believe that dogs are the ultimate guardians of the human heart, hit that like button, share this story with a friend who needs a reminder of what true loyalty looks like, and subscribe for more tales of courage that will leave you speechless.